If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 40 Creation, Expectation, Tomorrow. Yeah, just a lot to take in, that's all. New school, new people. You know how it is. The memory of Yaoyorozu Momo inviting Kaminari over to her place flashed through Jiro's mind again, making her feel a bit irritated. Yet, the sound of the wind over the phone did little to mask Jiro's mood, and it didn't go unnoticed by the boy on the other end. His normally soft gaze hardened with concern. Was Jiro being bullied at UA? He clenched his jaw at the thought, frustrated at his own failure to get into the hero course. If only he had spent more time on his studies. But instead of confronting Jiro directly, he switched the topic with a casual tone, trying to lift her spirits by talking about things she liked. By the way, have you met that Kaminari Denki? Kaminari, what about him? Jiro's brow furrowed. She suddenly had the urge to end the call. Hey, did you already forget? The boy let out a small laugh. Weren't you the one who said you wanted to start a band with Kaminari? I've been waiting to hear how that's going. He was fully behind the idea, not only because he admired Kaminari's music, but also because it would be a way for him to stay close to Jiro, even if they were in different schools. It seemed like a win-win to him. A band. For some reason, that word sparked a faint light in Jiro's eyes, a fire that had been nearly extinguished by the day's events. If I start a band with Kaminari, does that mean we'd be spending a lot of time together? She wasn't sure why she felt this way. She couldn't even explain to herself why she felt the need to be around Kaminari so much lately, only that she didn't like the idea of him being alone with Yaoyorozu Momo. I'll talk to Kaminari about it tomorrow. Great, don't forget this time. And maybe introduce me to him when you get the chance, the blue-haired boy teased, trying to lighten the mood. Don't worry, I won't forget. Jiro said with newfound resolve, then quickly ended the call. Her finger hovered over Kaminari's contact number on her phone. Although she said she would talk to him about it tomorrow, she was tempted to call him right now. But then again, he was probably still studying with Yaoyorozu Momo at the moment. She didn't want to disturb him, especially since he seemed so invested in learning about electromagnetism. Glancing at the time, she finally sighed and locked her phone. I'll just tell him in person tomorrow. 7 p.m. Kaminari had gained a lot from Momo's help and was now on the Shinkansen back to Saitama. Meanwhile, Momo herself was staring at a small whiteboard filled with complex electromagnetic equations, feeling quite pleased with today's progress. Just a bit more, and he'll be caught up, she murmured to herself with a satisfied smile. However, remembering the speed at which Kaminari absorbed the material, she couldn't help but feel a little troubled. It looks like I need to start preparing more advanced material, or else I'll run out of things to teach him soon. With this thought in mind, she put down the crystal glass in her hand and turned to the elderly butler standing behind her. Please move all the books on electromagnetism to the study. Yes, miss, the butler replied with a courteous bow. On the train, Kaminari leaned against the window, quietly contemplating Yaoyorozu Momo's quirk. He found himself enjoying this quiet time alone, lost in thought. After all, Momo had put so much effort into helping him, the least he could do was think about ways to reciprocate. While he might not be as knowledgeable as Momo when it came to academics, he had his own insights, especially when it came to the development of quirks. He was confident he could offer some helpful advice. Her quirk is called creation. It allows her to create any inanimate object, as long as she understands its structure. It's an impressive ability, but it's not without its limits. From what he knew, creation had its fair share of restrictions, just like every other quirk in this world. The first major limitation was her own energy reserve, in her case, body fat. The more complex or larger the object she wanted to create, the more fat she had to burn. If she used her quirk recklessly, it could take a toll on her body. After all, a human body with no fat reserves would face serious health risks. The second limitation was her understanding of the objects she wanted to create. The more detailed her knowledge of an item's structure, the easier and smoother the creation process would be. While the first issue could be resolved with a more caloric diet, the second required innate intelligence and an aptitude for learning. Not everyone had the talent to memorize complex schematics and molecular structures. Kaminari realized that if this quirk belonged to an average person, they'd probably only manage to create simple items like tissues their entire life. In short, Momo's quirk was as high-end as her family's wealth, top tier, but not without challenges. But why does it feel like her quirk doesn't fully live up to the name creation? Kaminari pondered, before suddenly realizing what was bothering him. If it only allows her to reproduce objects that already exist, shouldn't it be called manufacturing instead? She's not really creating something new, she's just making known items based on pre-existing data. True creation involved innovation, bringing something new into existence. If he asked Momo to create something fantastical like a golden saint cloth, would she be able to do it? The answer was clearly no. At least not right now. However, another possibility dawned on him. What if Momo's quirk really was creation, but her current limitations were due to her age and inexperience? Perhaps, as she grew stronger, she might unlock its full potential. If that's the case, the key to her quirk might not just be understanding the molecular structure of objects, but also gaining a deeper understanding of the world itself. Whether or not this theory was correct, Kaminari had decided to maintain a close relationship with Momo. Was that opportunistic of him? Maybe, but he was an adult at heart, far beyond the naive age where friendships had to be free from any ulterior motives. Besides, he didn't have any bad intentions. He genuinely valued her potential and had elevated her position in his mind because of it. After all, everyone had different levels of intimacy with their friends, and absolute equality was an illusion. That's just human nature. I need to share this theory with Momo soon, maybe tomorrow, Kaminari thought as he watched the nightscape blur past the train window. The more he immersed himself in this world, especially since getting involved with UA, the more he found himself genuinely excited by everything he encountered. Living a life where there was always something to look forward to, who wouldn't want that? Chapter 41, Tetsu's future. Early the next morning, Kaminari met Tetsu at the entrance of the subway station as planned, and the two headed off to UA High School in Shizuoka Prefecture together. This time, no one was driving them. Hey, what's up with you? Kaminari asked as soon as he sat down, frowning at Tetsu, who was sitting across from him. Did you get into a fight after school yesterday? It was hard not to make that assumption based on Tetsu's current appearance. Not only did he have a band-aid on his nose, but there was another one peeking out from the cuff of his sleeve. Well, haha, it's nothing serious. Tetsu scratched the back of his head, glancing sheepishly out the window. I wasn't fighting anyone. It's just that my training with Mr. Daimon was a bit intense yesterday. I wasn't paying attention during one of the throws, and I ended up landing on my face. He inwardly sighed, thinking to himself how embarrassing it was to be distracted during practice, trying to analyze Mr. Daimon's moves while being tossed around like a rag doll. Trying to steer the conversation away from himself, he quickly asked, "Forget about me, what happened to your glove? You used to always wear it." Kaminari shrugged, sensing that Tetsu didn't want to delve into the details. Everyone had secrets they preferred to keep, after all. I sent it to I-Island for some upgrades, he said casually. I wanted to add a few more features. Like what? The ability to play music? Tetsu asked, half-jokingly. He hadn't forgotten the scene during the practical exam when Kaminari used the glove to blast an electromagnetic cannon while a rock soundtrack played in the background. That was a moment not easily forgotten, especially for the person being launched through the air. Yeah, among other things, Kaminari replied, nodding without any hesitation. It was clear that he didn't think there was anything odd about having a built-in BGM function. Or perhaps he knew it was unconventional but just didn't care. Speaking of which, Kaminari suddenly closed the book on electromagnetism he'd been reading and leaned forward. I've been thinking about your quirk, and I might have some ideas that could help you out. Really? Tell me. Tetsu perked up immediately, looking at Kaminari with hopeful eyes. At this point, he basically considered Kaminari his unofficial quirk advisor. Well, before I get into that, do you know who Kirishima Eijiro is in our class? Kaminari asked. Tetsu's expression soured at the mention of the name. Of course, I know him. His quirk overlaps with mine, and it looks like he's aiming to be the hardest hero around. Clenching his fists, he declared, "Humph, I'll show him. There's going to be a massive gap between us, an unscalable mountain. And that mountain is me, the future Colossus." Kaminari sighed. The sudden burst of enthusiasm seemed a bit over the top. "I'm sure you'll get stronger, no doubt. But if we're being honest, when it comes to sheer hardness, I think Kirishima's quirk might have the edge over your steel." "What? That's impossible!" Tetsu exclaimed, clearly shaken. He had always believed that his quirk was top tier in terms of toughness. Of course, after meeting Kaminari, he had been forced to reconsider his position somewhat, but still, this was a hard pill to swallow. "Calm down and hear me out," Kaminari said, patting Tetsu on the arm. The outburst had drawn a few glances from the surrounding passengers, so it was best not to cause a scene. "Humph," Tetsu grunted, sitting back down with a defiant look, as if daring Kaminari to prove his point. "All right," Kaminari began, suppressing a smile. "Here's the thing. Kirishima's quirk is called hardening. He can harden his skin either globally or locally. While that might sound similar to your steel, I'm not talking about the similarities but rather the potential upper limits. Your quirk's limit is defined. Steel has a fixed hardness. But for Kirishima, it seems like there isn't an obvious cap on how hard he can get. Of course, I'm not saying that his hardening is limitless, but I'm guessing that his upper threshold is higher than yours. If that's the case, the gap might not be noticeable now, but as you both continue to grow, you might find it becoming more apparent." Tetsu was silent, trying to process Kaminari's words. Although much of what Kaminari was saying was speculation, it wasn't entirely unfounded. He couldn't deny the logic behind it, even if he didn't want to accept it. If what you're saying is true, then what can I do about it?" he asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Kaminari grinned. "I have an idea, though I can't guarantee it'll work." He didn't see guessing as a bad thing. In fact, many scientific breakthroughs started with a hypothesis. And considering they were only 15, they had the luxury of trial and error. Even if they failed, the experience would be invaluable. Tetsu's gaze stayed fixed on Kaminari, waiting for his friend to continue. "Your first step is to focus on shaping," Kaminari said. "Shaping?" Tetsu repeated, puzzled. "Yeah," Kaminari explained. "Look at your hands when you use your quirk." He pointed at Tetsu's iron-covered fingers. "Notice how they're slightly sharper now? And the way your hair hardens, it becomes like metal spikes." Tetsu looked at his hands, then touched his stiff, metallic hair. "You're right, they do look sharper. So," Kaminari continued, "I'm wondering if your quirk has hidden passive abilities related to shaping and sharpness. If your fingers and hair can take on sharper forms, why not other parts of your body? With the right training, you might be able to consciously shape different parts of your body, turning a passive effect into an active ability." Tetsu's eyes widened. If that were true, it would open up a whole new world of possibilities for his quirk. "You mean, I could turn my entire arm or leg into a blade?" he asked, excitement creeping into his voice. "Exactly." Kaminari nodded. "Start by focusing on the changes you feel in your fingers when you activate your quirk. Compare that sensation to other parts of your body. Once you can identify the difference, try to apply that feeling elsewhere." Kaminari knew that in this world, quirks were closely linked to the body's natural functions. Just as athletes could learn to control individual muscle groups, it made sense that someone could learn to manipulate the unique aspects of their quirk with enough practice. If Tetsu actually manages to pull this off, we might need to come up with a new hero name for him. Blade Man? Iron Slicer? Kaminari thought, grinning at the prospect. His old habit of brainstorming hero names had returned. Chapter 42 Pikachu Band. Kaminari. As Kaminari and the preoccupied Tetsu walked into Class 1A, Yayorozu Momo, who had just arrived and hung her expensive school bag on the hook beside her desk, called out to them. "Good morning, Yayorozu-san." Kaminari greeted her with a smile, waving as he walked to his seat. After greeting a few other classmates, he pulled a sealed file folder from his Pikachu-themed backpack, a product made by his family's company. "What's this?" Yayorozu, who looked as polished as always, accepted the folder from Kaminari, her expression curious. "It's some suggestions and theories I put together for the development of your quirk," Kaminari explained. "I thought it might be helpful. Take a look when you have time." "Ah? Oh. Thank you, thank you." Yayorozu's face lit up with surprise and gratitude. The folder felt substantial in her hands, and it was clear there was a lot of content inside. She immediately understood that Kaminari had put a lot of thought and effort into this. As the eldest daughter of the Yayorozu family, one of Japan's wealthiest and most influential families, Momo had always been surrounded by support. Even before she was born, a team of quirk researchers had been preparing for her potential quirk development. Once she awakened her quirk, creation, the experts in her family developed a detailed training plan for her, based on a thorough analysis of her abilities. Her extensive knowledge wasn't just due to her own hard work, the resources and guidance provided by her family played a significant role. In fact, it was the analysis team's recognition of creation's potential that had led her to pursue a path in the hero course. Otherwise, as a member of such a prestigious family, a career in business management would have been a more traditional choice. Because of this background, the analysis and suggestions Kaminari prepared might not hold much technical value compared to the advice from professional researchers. But that didn't lessen the importance she placed on this folder. It was the first genuine, thoughtful gift she had received at UA, and the sentiment behind it meant a lot to her. This is a token of appreciation for helping me, Yaoyorozu thought to herself, clutching the file tightly. I need to keep it safe. Kaminari noticed how carefully she took the folder and felt a sense of satisfaction. He knew full well that the Yaoyorozu family had their own experts, and his analysis might not be groundbreaking for her. But he had still spent 2 hours compiling it. Was it a waste of time? Maybe. Was it pointless? He didn't think so. Many people hesitate to give gifts they've made themselves, worrying if they are practical or valuable enough. Kaminari believed that a gift's value wasn't just about its utility or price, it was about the thought behind it. Even if his suggestions weren't particularly useful, he was confident that Yaoyorozu would appreciate the gesture. Besides, as a time traveler, who's to say his insights didn't hold some worth? After 4 regular classes, Kaminari noticed something odd. Jiro, who usually came up to chat during breaks, seemed hesitant and kept stopping herself from saying something. This continued until lunch. Wow, this mapo tofu is amazing! Kaminari exclaimed as he savored a bite of the spicy, flavorful dish in U.A.'s bustling cafeteria. He had underestimated U.A.'s culinary offerings. As a top-tier school, they certainly didn't cut corners, and the prices were astonishingly affordable. Only 1,000 yen for a plate of spicy tofu? That's practically a steal. He thought, comparing it to the cost of dining at a Chinese restaurant outside. Kaminari-kun, do you really like spicy food that much? Yaoyorozu asked, surprised as she watched him devour the fiery red tofu. She couldn't imagine eating something that spicy. Even Tetsu and Jiro, who were familiar with Kaminari's tastes, looked on with curious expressions. Spicy food wasn't exactly common fare for most Japanese people. Yeah, I love it, Kaminari admitted with a grin, scooping another bite onto his spoon. But it's pretty pricey outside, so I only get to enjoy it once in a while. Seeing how much he enjoyed it, they decided not to comment further. After all, personal tastes varied, and it wasn't worth making a big deal out of. Kaminari, Jiro finally spoke up, setting her water glass down nervously. I wanted to talk to you about something. Kaminari raised an eyebrow, sensing that this was the reason behind her odd behavior all morning. I thought something was off with you today. You're not acting like the usual cool Kyoka I know. Alright, go ahead. What's on your mind? Jiro hesitated again but then took a deep breath. Well, you know how I mentioned before that I really like your music. Yeah. Kaminari nodded, still unsure of where this was going. Hey, don't interrupt. Jiro snapped, her voice rising slightly in frustration. Kaminari burst out laughing, catching Jiro off guard. She glared at him, annoyed. What's so funny? I'm just glad to see the Kyoka I know is back, he said, his smile not fading. Jiro felt her tension ease at Kaminari's teasing tone, and her expression softened. For some reason, seeing his relaxed smile made her feel a bit more confident. I can play rock, too, you know. I'm pretty good with the bass, guitar, and even the keyboard. So. I was wondering if you'd be interested in jamming together sometime. She blurted out her words in one breath, her voice louder than usual, drawing the attention of some other students nearby. Sure. Kaminari agreed immediately, not missing a beat. Actually, why don't we form a band? Wait, what? Jiro stared at him in disbelief. She hadn't expected him to be so enthusiastic or to take the conversation in this direction. It wasn't what she'd pictured in her head. Nearby, a few of their classmates, including Yaoyorozu, Tetsu, Midoriya, and Todoroki, couldn't help but listen in with curiosity. Yet. Kaminari continued, his eyes bright with excitement. I even thought of a band name. How about we call ourselves the Pikachu Band? And I've already got an idea for our first single. Chapter 43, The Way of the Raikage. The decision to form the Pikachu Band was made so casually during lunch that Jiro only began to process her emotions after returning to the classroom. Wait. I'm already in a band with Kaminari. Oh, right, and the band's name? Pikachu? In her mind, an image popped up of a bright yellow electric mouse, shredding on an electric guitar and jamming out to Only My Railgun. Pfft. Jiro couldn't help but laugh out loud, smiling to herself. That's a pretty cute name, actually. At that moment, the sound of steady footsteps echoed from outside the door. Before the door even opened, a familiar voice boomed into the room. Wa tashi ga kata. The moment that voice reached the classroom, Midoriya was the first to react. While most people were only somewhat familiar with the voice, Midoriya had no doubt. He knew that voice by heart. Bang! Come in through the door normally. The door swung open violently, and in the next moment, the towering figure of All Might stepped into Class A. Oh! Whoa! It's All Might! I can't believe it. He really is a teacher here at U.A. Excitement rippled through the class. Most of the students couldn't contain their enthusiasm at seeing Japan's strongest hero. Even usually composed students like Shoto Todoroki and Yaeorozu Momo looked impressed. After all, this man wasn't just any hero, he was the symbol of peace, recognized as the greatest hero of the modern era. Everyone had grown up hearing stories about him or seeing him on TV. For most students, this was a surreal moment. There might be kids in Japan who didn't know the Prime Minister's name, but there wasn't a single person who didn't know who All Might was. Finally, I get to meet All Might in person. Kaminari wasn't as starstruck as some of the others, but he still acknowledged All Might's presence with due respect. There was no denying the awe-inspiring aura surrounding the man. Kaminari had watched enough videos to know that All Might's power was on a completely different level compared to other pro heroes. Even Endeavor, Japan's second-ranked hero, didn't quite measure up to All Might in terms of raw strength and impact in battle. One particular video stuck in Kaminari's mind, a short clip that only lasted about 30 seconds. It showed All Might fighting a villain with a cloning quirk. With just one punch. The sheer air pressure from a simple straight punch sent nearly 20 clones in the ground beneath them flying hundreds of meters into the air. And in the final moments of the video, Kaminari could faintly see layers of clouds being dispersed by the force of All Might's punch, which he later confirmed after multiple viewings. Kaminari still remembered how that day he couldn't help but blurt out the words, "One Punch Man." His father, not understanding the reference, even praised him for the apt description. In his mind, All Might was akin to a living, breathing nuclear bomb in human form. As he stood at the podium, Kaminari couldn't help but acknowledge the sheer destructive potential this man held. All Might struck a pose similar to that of a bodybuilder and, with a voice that had inspired hope in countless people, announced. Without further ado, today's lesson is combat training. The one who reacted most excitedly was, unsurprisingly, Bakugo, who had been itching for a fight. His mind instantly conjured up scenarios of facing off against Midoriya, Kaminari, and Tetsu, imagining glorious victories in each battle. Needless to say, in his mind, he was never the one getting beaten. And with that comes this. Look here. All Might gestured toward the wall, where 4 rows of large cabinets slid open, revealing rows of boxes marked with green numbers. These are your battle uniforms, customized based on the quirk reports and requirement ideas you submitted before enrollment. Whoa! Kirishima, Tetsu, and others couldn't hide their excitement. They hadn't expected to be putting on their own hero costumes so soon. At that moment, All Might's gaze fell on Kaminari, who had been quietly observing him. Their eyes met, and for a brief second, Kaminari was caught off guard. All Might smiled warmly, thinking Kaminari might be one of his fans, similar to Midoriya. Young Kaminari, your battle suit was temporarily transferred to a different support company, so the newest version hasn't been completed yet. For today, you'll be using the one crafted by your previous support team. Got it? Kaminari nodded, then walked over to retrieve his gear. Once he returned to his seat, he didn't immediately open the package like the others. Instead, he glanced at his right hand and thought to himself, if the electric gloves are still part of the set, then it's good enough. He shook his head slightly, resigning himself to the temporary gear. He then turned his attention to the white and gold battlesuit laid out on the desk. Compared to some of his classmates' armored or high-tech suits, his outfit was rather simple. It consisted of a white robe with gold accents, paired with a small, headphone-like device that seemed to function as a wireless communicator, assuming the support company had followed his original design. Whoa! Kaminari pulled off his school uniform jacket and slipped into the robe with casual ease. His dramatic movements caused the long back hem of the robe to float in the air briefly, revealing the characters emblazoned on it. The first Raikiri. Kaminari, what does that mean? Tetsu, sitting behind him, asked curiously. His question caught the attention of Yaoyorozu, Momo, Jiro, and several others who were nearby. They exchanged confused glances. None of them seemed to understand the reference, even Yaoyorozu, who prided herself on her vast knowledge. She knew what first generation meant, but what about Raikiri? It's a title I've given myself. Kaminari finished adjusting the communicator in his ear, then turned around with a confident smile. He explained, the will of thunder follows like a shadow, always present. That's the meaning of thunder shadow. He paused for a moment, his smile deepening. And as for first generation, it represents my ambition. I plan to be the founder of a new legacy, a new way of the thunder quirk. Chapter 44, Smash and Railgun. Nice dream. All Might gave a thumbs up and laughed. Young Kaminari, remember your words today. They will surely guide you through your future growth. Yes, Kaminari nodded, acknowledging the praise. Raikiri, hey. Bakugo muttered to himself, thinking about the title. Finally, he scoffed and grumbled, what a weird name. But the thought triggered something inside him. He began contemplating his future hero name. It had to be more impressive than Kaminari's. How about Explosion King? Yeah, that sounds badass. At that moment, All Might signaled for everyone to get ready. Once the students had taken turns changing into their hero costumes, they were instructed to meet in the school's simulated community the beta playground for training. All Might left first to prepare the venue. 15 minutes later, all 20 members of Class 1A, now donned in their custom hero outfits, stepped out of the dark corridor, emerging like heroes from a comic book panel. Every one of them exuded an aura of confidence and anticipation. Should I be playing hero right now? Kaminari mused to himself, imagining a dramatic soundtrack to match their entrance. If only he had brought some music equipment with him, he might have actually done it. Not bad. Everyone looks sharp. All Might's booming voice rang out as he observed the students, a sense of pride welling up in his chest. These young men and women, he thought, were the future pillars of the hero world. Good. All Might clapped his hands. Then let's get started, fertilized eggs. Kaminari felt a vein pop in his forehead as he mentally cursed, did All Might just call us fertilized eggs? Is this a normal thing for him to say? He glanced around and realized no one else seemed fazed by the comment. Maybe it's not an insult after all. I'll have to look this up later, he concluded. All Might, however, had already begun explaining the details of today's lesson. Although most of what you see in the news are outdoor villain battles, statistically speaking, there's a much higher probability of dealing with villains indoors. Imprisonment, house arrests, underground trades. These all occur indoors, away from the public eye. He paused for a moment, coughing slightly before continuing. Ahem. Anyway, the most cunning villains hide in the shadows. Today's exercise will be a 2-on-2 indoor battle scenario. You will be split into two groups, villains and heroes. The villains will hide a nuclear weapon somewhere in their stronghold, and it's the hero's job to locate and secure it within the time limit. The villains, of course, must protect it or capture the heroes to win. All Might paused again, giving the students time to process the rules before continuing. The location of the nuclear weapon is up to the villain team, so make sure to consider your quirks when deciding where to place it. Kaminari nodded to himself. Simple enough. Use quirks to either defend or attack in a confined space. Got it. The next part of the exercise involved randomly drawing names to determine the teams, which All Might had prepared in advance. He pulled names from two separate boxes, announcing the pairings. Group A, Midoriya Izuku and Yurika Okako. Group B, Shoto Todoroki and Shoji Mizo. Group C, Yaoyorozu Momo and Minoru Mineta. Group D, Bakugo Katsuki and Ida Tinya. Group E, Ashido Mina and Aoyama Yuga. Group F, Shiro Hanta and Kota Koji. Group G, Kaminari Denki and Jiro Kyoka. Group H, Tokoyami Fumikage and Ashui Tsuyu. Group I, Ojiro Mashirao and Toru Hagakure. Group J, Kirishima Ajiro and Tetsu. Kaminari glanced at his partner, Jiro Kyoka, and then over at Tetsu, who had been paired with Kirishima. A smile tugged at his lips. Those two hard-headed guys together? That's going to be something. The students quickly gathered with their assigned partners, some of them shouting words of encouragement, others whispering quietly to discuss strategy. However, students like Bakugo and Todoroki remained silent, both exuding confidence that seemed to make them oblivious to their partners. Now, for the first match. All Might announced with his characteristic grin, pulling out 2 number balls from the black and white boxes. Group A will be the heroes. He pointed toward Midoriya and Eureka. Group D will be the villains. He gestured to Bakugo and Ida. The rest of you, head to the control room to observe. As Kaminari followed the rest of the class to the dimly lit control room, his gaze lingered on Midoriya. This should be interesting. Let's see what your quirks are really about. Kaminari, Jiro's voice interrupted his thoughts as she leaned in close to whisper, you seem really interested in Midoriya. Kaminari blinked, momentarily distracted by her proximity before nodding. Yeah, I am. Don't you think his quirks are fascinating? He acts like he's got nothing special going on, but when he uses his power, it's like he's an entirely different person. I'm curious to see what he'll do in this exercise. The screens in front of them flickered to life, displaying different angles of the simulation area. Kaminari watched intently as Midoriya and Bakugo squared off. Midoriya's early moves were impressive, showing quick thinking and an almost preternatural ability to predict Bakugo's actions. Midoriya's clever, Kaminari thought, feeling a sense of appreciation for the boy's tactical skills. But how much of that comes from knowing Bakugo's moves ahead of time? Suddenly, one of the screens was engulfed in fire, the sheer power of Bakugo's explosion overwhelming the camera feed. Kaminari and the others could only stare, feeling the heat of the blast even through the monitor. Whoa! He went all out! Kirishima exclaimed, shaking his head in disbelief. It's just training, man! Was that really necessary? Yet, what was he thinking? He could have seriously hurt Midoriya in such a confined space, Tetsu muttered, his expression darkening. His opinion of Bakugo had already been low, but this just pushed it lower. Reckless idiot! Hold on, Kaminari pointed at the screen, where Midoriya had reappeared, seemingly unharmed. Midoriya's fine. Look, he's about to make his move. And just as Kaminari predicted, Midoriya shone once again. This time, however, it wasn't just his fingers that were glowing, his entire right arm was charged with power. Smash! The soundless shockwave from Midoriya's punch was displayed on the monitors, the sheer force obliterating the ceiling and much of the surrounding area. The building shook as if a bomb had gone off. What the hell did I just watch? Kaminari muttered, his mind struggling to comprehend the level of power Midoriya had just unleashed. It was similar to the destructive force of his own railgun, perhaps even stronger in terms of raw impact. The room fell silent as they processed what had just happened. Jiro, who had been quietly watching beside Kaminari, suddenly spoke up. That's about the same as when you used your move with Tetsu, right? Her words snapped the rest of the class out of their shock, drawing their attention to Kaminari. All Might, standing nearby, also seemed to recall that golden flash from Kaminari's practical exam. Indeed, as Kaminari processed the comparison, All Might's gaze shifted toward him. Kaminari's railgun back then was just as powerful as Midoriya's smash. But while Midoriya can only unleash such force with one for all and suffer intense backlash, Kaminari managed that without any visible drawbacks. Chapter 45, The Second Battle Between Group B and Group G. Kaminari saw the look in All Might's eyes and could already guess what was running through his mind. Laughing, he joked, for those who are curious, maybe once Midoriya recovers from his injuries, we can have him try out my railgun. Let's see whose moves pack more punch. Though Kaminari was half joking, a small part of him was genuinely curious. However, he also knew All Might would never agree to something so dangerous. Sure enough. Good joke. All Might smiled but quickly became serious, casting a glance at Midoriya on the screen. But that's way too dangerous. First of all, I won't allow it under any circumstances, and I hope none of you even consider trying it in private. His tone darkened. From my experience, if your powers were to clash head-on, the resulting shockwave would likely be fatal. Even if you were lucky enough to survive, serious injury would be inevitable. So, Kaminari, promise me you won't entertain that thought again. Kaminari shrugged, feeling slightly disappointed but understanding the weight of All Might's warning. All right, I was just messing around. I won't. Hearing this, All Might finally relaxed. He had been genuinely worried that these young and reckless students might try to settle their curiosity by challenging each other to see who was stronger. Ordinary teenagers could have a scuffle and get away with a few bruises. But if Kaminari and Midoriya, both capable of incredibly destructive power, fought recklessly, the consequences would be catastrophic. At that moment, Midoriya had already been transferred to the school's infirmary for recovery. Meanwhile, Bakugo, Ida, and Uraraka returned to the monitoring room, awaiting All Might's final evaluation. The outcome of the battle was clear: Midoriya's Group A won the training exercise. However, from a real-world perspective, the situation told a different story. Neither Bakugo nor Ida had suffered injuries or been captured, whereas both Midoriya and Uraraka were incapacitated, one severely injured, the other barely conscious. In an actual combat scenario, their defeat would have been certain. That's why Tokoyami had whispered to himself, win the battle, lose the war. The best performer this time was Ida, All Might declared in his usual booming voice. Kaminari silently agreed with this assessment. Midoriya and Bakugo had approached the exercise like it was just a school test, but they had overlooked a critical aspect: the essence of the hero course was to train them to be professional heroes. To truly succeed, they needed to approach every exercise with the mindset of a professional hero, not just students. Kaminari had grasped this idea during the entrance exam and used it to guide his actions, opting to tackle the 0-point robot despite knowing he might fail. He had focused on the bigger picture. Once Yaoyorozu finished her detailed analysis of the match, All Might prepared for the next round. All right. Let's move to a new location and get ready for the second battle. After relocating to another control room in a different building, All Might reminded everyone, be sure to reflect on Yaoyorozu's excellent feedback. Think carefully about it before you dive into this next match. With that, he reached into the black and white boxes once again to determine the teams. In the second battle, the heroes' team will be Group B. The villains will be Group G. As the results were announced, the students exchanged glances, each trying to remember who was in which group. Then Kaminari Denki, Jiro Kyoka, Shoto Todoroki, and Shoji Mizo stepped forward and walked out in silence. It's Kaminari versus Todoroki! Shiro exclaimed, his eyes wide with excitement. Haha, this is going to be intense. Mina Ashido practically bounced with enthusiasm. Bakugo, however, remained silent. Of all the students in Class 1A, he was the most eager to see how Kaminari and Todoroki's powers measured up. Were they really so much stronger than him? He couldn't accept that. He wouldn't. There's no way I'm gonna settle for third place, Bakugo thought, his fists clenching as he watched Kaminari and Todoroki leave. I'm the best. I'm the one who's going to win. I didn't expect those two to be paired up. All Might muttered to himself, his expression serious. Then, turning to the rest of the class, he said, you all stay here. I'm going outside to keep an eye on things. Without much explanation, he left quickly, preparing to intervene if anything went wrong. Whoa! Their match even has All Might nervous. Kirishima said, scratching the back of his head and grinning. I'm looking forward to it too, Yaoyorozu added, her gaze following Kaminari on the screen. TCH, Kaminari will win for sure. Tetsu declared with absolute confidence in his friend. For once, no one argued with him. Kaminari's earlier performance had earned him the respect of the class, and many believed he had the strength to stand toe-to-toe with Shoto Todoroki, the top recommended student. But which one was stronger? That was the real question. Meanwhile, on the fourth floor of the building where the battle would take place, Kaminari and Jiro were preparing. Jiro, Kaminari said, glancing at her. Your quirk lets you amplify your heartbeat and use it as a sound-based attack, right? Jiro nodded, pointing to her special combat boots. Yeah, I can emit mid-range sound waves through these speakers. It's powerful enough to cause some serious damage. Good. You'll stay here and guard the corridor. If Shoji shows up, try to hold him off until time runs out. Jiro frowned. What about Todoroki? His ice powers are. I'll handle Todoroki. He won't make it to this floor. Kaminari clicked the communicator on his ear and began walking toward the exit. Where are you going? Are you seriously planning to take them both on by yourself? Jiro asked, her voice laced with worry. Kaminari smirked, not stopping as he headed down the stairs. Todoroki's quirk is ice. If we stay in a confined space, we're done for. I'm going to drag him outside. Jiro blinked in confusion. Fight him, outside. Even All Might, listening through his earpiece, raised an eyebrow. This boy, is he really planning to fight Todoroki head-on? On the other side of the building, Shoto Todoroki and Shoji Mizo had already begun their approach. There's someone in a room on the north side of the 4th floor, Shoji reported, his 4 additional ears relaying the information. The other one, they're moving fast, coming straight toward us. Todoroki nodded and stepped forward. Go outside. It's going to get dangerous in here. Before Shoji could respond, a bright golden light flashed from the dark hallway. The light intensified rapidly, accompanied by the crackling sound of electricity. He's here! Shoji shouted. Todoroki's expression remained calm, but his movements were swift. He pressed his hand against the wall and activated his ice quirk. In an instant, the corridor was filled with thick, glistening icicles that shot forward, rapidly expanding and freezing everything in their path. Your strategy isn't bad, Todoroki thought as he focused on the approaching light. But there's a gap between us you won't be able to close. Sizzle. Chapter 46, Shoto and Kakashi's Choice. What is that? Shoji, standing behind Todoroki, suddenly felt a sharp pain in his copied ears, his vision blinded by an intense golden light. For a brief moment, he couldn't see anything at all. Asterisk crack. Asterisk. The light, faster than sound, illuminated the room before the harsh, electric buzz reached his ears. But that wasn't what concerned Shoji. He had been hit by electricity. Ah! Shoji's scream lasted only a moment, the golden light and sound vanishing almost as quickly as they had appeared. When the light dimmed and the sound faded, Todoroki glanced around. His ice wall, cracked but still standing, had protected him, but something was missing. He's gone. Todoroki frowned as he scanned the area, realizing that Shoji had disappeared. To be honest, he didn't fully understand what had just happened. After unleashing his ice attack, all he had heard was the rapid crackling of electricity, followed by the blinding flash of golden light. His instincts had kicked in just in time, allowing him to freeze the area around him, forming a protective wall of ice. But now, Shoji was nowhere to be seen. From outside, Kaminari's voice echoed, though his tone carried a mischievous edge. Hey! Hero, how about saying goodbye to your partner? All Might, who was watching from a nearby rooftop, stared at Kaminari in mild disbelief. What's with these kids today? First Ida, and now Kaminari, why are they so eager to play villain? In the control room, the other students exchanged glances. Yaeorozu, suppressing a smile, suddenly chuckled. He's rather charming when he's like this. Ashidomina nodded enthusiastically. He's like the evil prince from a movie. Well, he's still a little behind me in style, but, yes, I see it, Aoyama Yuga added with a dramatic flick of his shining cape. On the screen, Todoroki silently emerged from the building, locking eyes with Kaminari, who stood waiting outside. Poor Shoji was slumped against a nearby telephone pole, completely paralyzed, watching helplessly. I became a prisoner, within a minute. Shoji sighed to himself, feeling a mixture of frustration and disbelief. How did you break through my ice? Todoroki asked coldly, his voice betraying a hint of confusion. You want to know? Kaminari shrugged, a sly grin spreading across his face. I did it with a 100 yen coin. He flicked a small metal coin into the air. It caught the sunlight, flashing brightly before he caught it again with a smooth, practiced motion. Stop joking around, Todoroki muttered, frowning deeply. He didn't believe Kaminari's explanation for a second. A joke? Maybe, Kaminari said nonchalantly. Then, cutting off whatever Todoroki was about to say, he gestured toward Shoji. You should be more worried about your partner, don't you think? Todoroki glanced at Shoji before calmly replying, rest there for now. I'll get you out soon. As he spoke, Todoroki's right side began to emanate cold air. It was clear he was preparing for a serious fight. But Kaminari wasn't done playing yet. He raised his hand and pointed back at the building behind him. But hero, the nuclear bomb inside is about to go off. Ready to abandon your partner? Todoroki's expression froze. All Might, the only one who could hear their conversation from his rooftop vantage point, was stunned by Kaminari's words. This boy, he's far too convincing as a villain. Kaminari's voice took on a taunting edge as he continued to press Todoroki, adding a cruel psychological pressure to the young hero's already heavy burden. We don't have much time left. Make your choice, hero. Kaminari's grin widened. It's simple, really. Give up your partner and stop the bomb, or fight me and watch the bomb explode, taking the whole city with it. If I were you, I'd forget about the partner. You're a hero, right? The mission comes first. That's what professional heroes do, isn't it? Todoroki's face darkened. He knew this was just an exercise, a training scenario. But the point of the exercise was to act like real, professional heroes. That meant making decisions as a pro-hero would in a real-world situation. And Kaminari's words were tearing at him. The mission, or the partner. This wasn't just about the training anymore. It felt personal. Kaminari's words echoed the difficult choices Todoroki would face in his future as a hero. The mission or the partner? This was the same question Kakashi, from another, harsher world, had faced long ago. Back then, Kakashi had chosen the mission over the lives of his comrades. Now, Kaminari watched with interest, wondering what Todoroki's answer would be. All Might, still observing from his rooftop, felt a chill down his spine. Young Kaminari, just how did you come up with something like this? Playing with someone's heart to this extent, it's terrifying. He decided then and there that, after this session ended, he would have to speak with Principal Nizu. Kaminari's potential needed to be watched closely. This boy had the cunningness of a villain, and if he ever strayed too far into the darkness. The timer continued to tick down, but Todoroki remained silent, lost in thought. His inner turmoil was evident to everyone watching the screens back in the control room, though they couldn't hear the conversation. In Todoroki's mind, two voices argued back and forth. The bomb is the bigger threat. If it explodes, it won't matter if I save Shoji. Everyone will die. But if I give up on my partner now, what will I do the next time? And the time after that? Will I give up again? Faster each time. If I choose the mission over and over again, will I still be myself? Will I become, like him? Todoroki's thoughts drifted to his father, Endeavor. His father's cold, relentless pursuit of strength, his emotionless gaze, it all weighed on Todoroki's mind, suffocating him. No. I'm not like him. I'm not the same. I'm not the same. Suddenly, Todoroki raised his head, and Kaminari could see a fierce determination burning in his eyes. Ice began to rapidly form at Todoroki's feet, surging forward to attack. You've chosen your partner, hey. Kaminari smirked, impressed. Good choice. But... beep, time's up. Villains win. Kaminari grinned as he glanced at the timer. You hesitated too long, Todoroki. Chapter 47, Kaminari's Choice. Crack. Kaminari calmly stared at the 2-meter-high icicle in front of him, only half a meter away. As the simulation came to an end, the mischievous grin on his face faded, replaced by his usual relaxed smile. Man, this is pretty cool. He could feel the cold air washing over him as he looked up at the sun. Compared to this, it really beats my quirks. Built-in air conditioning, natural and eco-friendly, Kaminari thought with amusement. Meanwhile, on the 4th floor, Jiro was still standing guard, wondering why the time was up. Confused, she muttered, what happened? Back in the monitoring room, where Yaoyorozu, Bakugo, and the others had been closely following the match, everyone shared similar expressions of confusion. What's going on? Ojiro flicked his tail, breaking the silence. Why hasn't anything happened yet? Kirishima scratched his head, puzzled by the lack of action. Todoroki didn't do anything? Why? Azui wondered aloud, tapping her lips thoughtfully. TCH. Bakugo clicked his tongue in annoyance, clearly unimpressed. Boring. Well, as long as Kaminari won, it doesn't matter, Tetsu grinned, completely unconcerned about the details. For him, the outcome was all that mattered. I don't get it. Yaoyorozu, who was usually confident in her ability to understand everything, shook her head in bewilderment, deciding to wait for Kaminari's explanation later. Down below the building, Kaminari stood in silence, waiting for Jiro to come down. All Might, standing between Kaminari and Todoroki, occasionally glanced at Kaminari with a mixture of curiosity and concern. After a long pause, All Might finally broke the silence, looking at Kaminari with a thoughtful expression. If it were you, what would you choose? Me. Kaminari didn't feel pressured. With a casual smile, he answered, I wouldn't hesitate. Remember, only kids worry about making choices. Hey! All Might blinked, caught off guard by the response. What do you mean? Todoroki, his voice still cold, asked, a slight trace of curiosity in his tone. I mean, Kaminari explained, walking up to the large icicle in front of him and gently touching it, his tone calm and steady, I'd charge straight at the villain, try to rescue my partner, and then deal with the nuclear bomb afterward. But if you do that, there's a good chance the bomb would go off, destroying the whole city because of your choice, Todoroki responded with a frown. Yeah, but it's not a guarantee, right? Kaminari continued, his voice growing even calmer. Sure, maybe the bomb goes off. Or maybe I save my partner and still have time to stop the bomb. It's all about possibilities. All Might watched the conversation between the two young heroes, silently contemplating Kaminari's words. Oddly enough, his own conclusions aligned with Kaminari's, though he had expected otherwise. But what if you fail? Todoroki started to protest, but Kaminari cut him off. Yeah, and what if I don't? What if things go wrong, and the bomb explodes? Kaminari shrugged, his tone nonchalant. If it happens, it happens. People need to learn that just because you try your hardest doesn't mean you're guaranteed a good result. Kaminari's voice became more resolute. But being able to face the consequences of your choice, without regret, that's something people should learn. At least that way, you won't die full of regret. Todoroki fell silent, clearly affected by Kaminari's words. He wasn't sure if Kaminari's philosophy was right, but it struck a chord. It was definitely better than the hesitation that had paralyzed him earlier. That's when All Might interjected. But Kaminari, how would you explain that to the citizens who lose everything because of your no regrets choice? Hey? What would I need to explain? Kaminari asked casually as he spotted Jiro approaching from the corridor. With a smile, he walked past All Might. If I'm dead, just like them, and I tried my best, that's explanation enough, don't you think? All Might's eyes widened, surprised by the casualness of Kaminari's answer. Kaminari continued walking toward Jiro, then paused and glanced back at the number one hero. There might be some perfect, ideal choice out there that works for everyone, Kaminari said, smiling softly. But there aren't many of those in life, are there? Then, as he resumed walking toward Jiro, he left All Might and Todoroki with one final thought. Of course, if it were you, All Might, I'm sure you'd be able to find that perfect choice. His voice trailed off as he walked away. After all, different results come from different abilities. Todoroki stood there, still processing Kaminari's words. Try your best, so that you have no regrets. Meanwhile, All Might, filled with both admiration and concern, watched Kaminari leave. He looked at the golden letters on Kaminari's back that read the first Raikiri fluttering in the breeze and thought to himself, this kid, he's going to be someone important in the future. At the same time, however, his worry deepened. Kaminari's mindset, though confident, walked a fine line. If he strayed too far, he could easily veer into a path too dangerous for any hero. Kaminari. Jiro's voice brought him back to the present. She ran up to Kaminari, her expression filled with confusion. What happened out there? What do you mean? Kaminari responded, grinning coolly. I handled everything, that's what. Jiro raised an eyebrow, sensing he was hiding something. Handled? What does that mean? Exactly what it sounds like, Kaminari chuckled, brushing it off. He didn't want to burden her with the heavier details of his encounter with Todoroki. She didn't need to worry about all that. But wasn't Todoroki also just 15, like her? Kaminari shrugged internally. Todoroki's an elite, a genius, he can handle it. I believe in him. Soon, All Might returned and announced the start of the third match. With a broad smile, he called out, in the third match, the hero's team is Group J, and the villain's team is Group C. The next pair of students stepped forward, Kirishima and Tetsu from Group J, along with Yae Orozuo and Mineta from Group C. Everyone gathered to watch the new battle unfold, while Todoroki and Shoji, still weighed down by the previous match, remained quiet and distant. As the screens flickered to life, showing the upcoming match, Kaminari couldn't help but watch closely. This time, it was Tetsu and Kirishima charging headfirst into battle, two hard-hitting boys with little regard for strategy, just pure brute force. They didn't even think this through, did they? Kaminari chuckled, watching the pair search each room systematically. But on the villain's side, Yaoyorozu was preparing something. Using her quirks, she had placed the nuclear bomb in the most strategic spot, then began crafting something else. What is she making? Kaminari squinted at the screen, watching as Yaoyorozu used her quirks to create a large magnet and a set of spray paint cans. Suddenly, Kaminari's heart sank. Oh no! I have a bad feeling about this. Chapter 48, Minoru Mineta's Hand Speed. Huff. Kirishima took a deep breath, staring at the number 8 on the wall, and muttered, slightly out of breath, "You think they're on the top floor? There are only 3 floors left." "Yet, judging from how things are set up, it has to be the top," Tetsu replied confidently, straightening up. Kirishima sighed, realizing how obvious it was. He approached the stairwell, looking upwards. "All right, so what's the plan?" "Plan?" Tetsu scoffed. "With our quirks, what other plan do we need?" Kirishima scratched his red, spiky hair, chuckling at his own pointless question. "Right, I guess there's only one way to go about this." "Exactly, let's go. No matter what Yaoyorozu and Mineta have in store for us, we can only handle it head-on." With that, Tetsu activated his quirk, covering his body in a layer of hardened iron, and slowly started walking up the stairs. Kirishima followed close behind, though he kept his quirk inactive for now. His hardening ability, while strong, made it difficult for him to move freely, and it couldn't last for long. Meanwhile, on the upper floor, Momo leaned against the wall, listening closely to the approaching footsteps echoing from the stairwell below. She didn't make any unnecessary movements or try to lure them further. That would have been too obvious and might have tipped them off. Despite Tetsu and Kirishima being straightforward in their approach, even they would sense if something felt too much like a trap. So instead, Momo waited quietly, setting her trap carefully. "They're coming." She could hear the heavy footsteps now, slow and cautious. Clearly, Tetsu and Kirishima were on high alert. Doesn't matter how cautious they are, Momo thought with a sly smile. They'll have to pass through this corridor anyway. But her smirk faded quickly as she glanced to the side. Minoru Mineta, her partner, was once again staring up at her from an unfortunate angle, his eyes glued to her legs and the hem of her skirt. Heh. Mineta scratched the purple grapes on his head nervously when he realized he'd been caught. Despite his embarrassment, his eyes couldn't help but drift to her chest again. Wow, being teamed up with Yaoyorozu is a dream come true. Mineta howled in his mind, practically drooling. Momo sighed. Dealing with Mineta's antics was exhausting. Still, she refocused her attention on the task at hand, just as Kirishima's voice echoed through the corridor. "Why is it so dark in here?" Kirishima hesitated, his eyes adjusting to the dim hallway. Tetsu noticed something was off too. He glanced back at the previous corridor they had passed through and then at the darkened hallway ahead. There was a clear difference in the lighting. "They're definitely in the hall up ahead," Tetsu declared. "Yeah, no kidding," Kirishima muttered. "The real problem is, this hallway is 100% a trap, and we have to go through it." Tetsu pursed his lips. "And with our quirks, there's no way around it, hey? We'll just have to go straight in. Man, why did we end up on the same team?" Kirishima groaned in frustration but accepted the situation. He activated his hardening quirk, his body turning into solid stone-like armor, though he left a few joints flexible to maintain some mobility. "All right, let's do this." Both Tetsu and Kirishima kept their eyes locked on the door at the far end of the corridor, wary of Mineta popping out and throwing his sticky grapes at them. They paid less attention to their feet, confident the path ahead was clear. Crack! Hey! What was that sound? They glanced at each other before looking down simultaneously. Kirishima's face fell. Something sticky and black clung to his foot. He dyed the purple grapes black. Kirishima realized, noticing the cleverly camouflaged traps. The floor and walls had been coated in a way that made the traps almost impossible to spot. "Take off your shoes." Tetsu had a rare stroke of genius and was about to share his plan when Momo's voice echoed from the hall ahead. Tetsu, look here. Hey. Tetsu instinctively turned toward her voice, only to see Momo and Mineta together, holding a massive magnet, pointed right at him. Ah! Before Tetsu could react, the magnet's powerful force pulled him forward, slamming him into it with a heavy clang. Boom! The impact rang out through the corridor, the sound of metal hitting metal resonating like thunder. It's now! With the plan falling into place, Momo didn't waste a second. She pulled out a roll of tape from her waist, aiming to tie Tetsu up. According to the competition rules, binding an opponent with this tape meant they were officially eliminated. But Tetsu wasn't going down without a fight. He deactivated his quirk, his body returning to normal as he tried to break free. After all his training with Daimon-sensei, he had learned never to give up without a counterattack. Meanwhile, Kirishima, having removed his shoes, sprinted down the hall at full speed. The match was reaching its critical moment. But just as Tetsu regained his footing, Mineta's seemingly sluggish demeanor vanished. His eyes sharpened, and in an instant, his hands moved with shocking speed. In just a heartbeat, 2 black grapes flew from Mineta's hands, sticking Tetsu's arms to his waist, immobilizing him. What the heck? Kaminari shouted from the monitoring room, watching the scene unfold. Is that what they mean by legendary single-guy hand speed? Seeing is believing. Tetsu, his arms stuck together, could only watch in frustration as Yaoyorozu calmly wrapped the tape around him, sealing his fate. In desperation, he yelled for help. Kirishima! What are you doing? Get over here and help me! His voice echoed loudly through the corridor, but even as he was fully restrained, no help came. Instead, he heard Kirishima's resigned voice from behind him. Forget it, man! We lost! Tetsu, still confused, didn't understand what had happened. But if he had been able to turn around, he would have immediately realized the problem. Kirishima had stepped on another black grape. There was no way Mineta would rely on just one grape trap. Under Momo's guidance, several carefully camouflaged grapes had been strategically placed along their path, trapping both boys. Back in the monitoring room, cheers erupted, especially for Momo's brilliant tactical performance. Even All Might, who had been quietly observing, was impressed. Well done, Yaoyorozu Momo. Excellent use of strategy and teamwork. Kaminari also couldn't help but feel amazed. He had previously thought those elaborate battle strategies in anime were exaggerated. But after witnessing Momo's plan in action, he was forced to reconsider. The so-called IQ crushing, turns out it's real after all, he muttered to himself, smiling with newfound respect. Chapter 49, A Girl's Voice. Before long, the remaining groups finished their matches. Since each game only lasted 15 minutes, everything wrapped up within 2 class periods. Perhaps it was the intensity of the battle between Midoriya and Bakugo in the first game that set the tone for the others, making everyone approach their matches with heightened seriousness. As a result, the level of competition remained consistently high, leaving Kaminari deeply entertained. One particular individual who caught his attention was Tokoyami Fumikage. His quirk, a fusion of the mutant and emitter types, allowed him not only to possess bird-like agility but also to summon a shadowy, bird-shaped entity. Kaminari couldn't help but feel curious about it. He wondered what it would feel like to touch that shadowy creature. Surely, it had to be an odd sensation, right? As for his earlier encounter with Todoroki, while it raised more questions than answers, it didn't seem to have much of an impact on the overall mood of the class. As Bakugo had bluntly put it, it was pretty boring. Finally, after the 7th period, the students of Class 1A wrapped up their day. Most of the teachers and students had already left the Hero Course building, save for the few who still lingered like Kaminari and a few others from Class 1A. Kaminari was just packing up his things when Kirishima and Ashidomina approached him with a proposal. They wanted to wait for Midoriya and properly introduce themselves. Sorry, I need to head home soon, Todoroki responded coldly, picking up his bag and walking out of the classroom without any further explanation. As for Bakugo, he had already left with a stormy expression, leaving the group no choice but to shift their attention to Kaminari and Yaoyorozu, who were also preparing to leave. Kaminari chuckled. I'd love to, but I'm heading over to Yaoyorozu's house to study electromagnetism after school, so, maybe next time. Seeing their disappointed expressions, Kaminari quickly added, don't worry, I've already memorized everyone's names. To prove it, he pointed at each one, reciting their full names perfectly. With a cheeky grin, he waved and followed Yaoyorozu out of the classroom. Yaoyorozu quietly followed behind him, her face filled with anticipation. To the casual observer, it might have seemed as though she was excited for a romantic evening, but in truth, she was simply looking forward to studying and teaching again. While Kaminari was handsome and talented, Yaoyorozu had grown up around many successful and attractive people. She didn't harbor any romantic thoughts. To her, this was purely an academic exchange, nothing more, nothing less. The same went for Kaminari. He wasn't interested in underage girls, regardless of Yaoyorozu's maturity and developed appearance. His focus was on his goals and ambitions. He had no time for distractions like love. But as with life, things rarely go as planned. Who knows what the future holds? Only time will tell. Kaminari. Just as the luxury car from Yaoyorozu's family arrived at the school gates, and Kaminari was about to get in, he suddenly heard a voice calling his name. Kyoka? What's up? Kaminari turned around in confusion, noticing Jiro approaching. Yaoyorozu stood silently beside him, watching. Jiro seemed slightly out of breath, but she composed herself before speaking. What you said this morning, were you serious? What did I say this morning? Kaminari asked, scratching his head before a grin spread across his face. Oh, you mean the Pikachu band? Jiro nodded, nervously clutching her bag. Yeah. Of course, I was serious. Why wouldn't I be? Kaminari said with enthusiasm. How about tomorrow? It's Sunday, and we're off school. We can head to my home studio, talk through the band's details, and maybe even work on our first track. Jiro's face lit up. Really? That sounds great. Seeing her happy expression, Kaminari smiled back. Yup, no problem at all. It'll be fun. With that, Jiro waved goodbye to both Kaminari and Yaoyorozu, quickly hurrying back toward the school, likely to join Kirishima and the others for their little meeting. As Kaminari watched her retreating figure, he couldn't help but shake his head with amusement. What a cute girl, he thought to himself. Shall we? Yaoyorozu asked, stepping into the car with quiet excitement. Kaminari followed suit, grabbing the car door as he was about to step in when. Kaminari. See you tomorrow. He stopped mid-step, turning around in confusion, but saw no one there. Shrugging, he got into the car. As the luxurious vehicle began to drive off, none of them noticed the slender figure standing by the hero course gates. Jiro Kyoka, once again, had come to watch the car leave, her eyes fixed on the glowing red tail lights until they disappeared from view. She bit her lip, turned around, and walked back into the school. See you tomorrow. She whispered to the empty sky, her words carried away by the soft breeze. Meanwhile, back in the school, Midoriya had just returned to the classroom, his arm wrapped in bandages. In a different room, the teachers were gathering once more, this time, led by Principal Nizu to review the audio and video recordings that All Might had brought back. This time, the room wasn't as crowded as earlier in the day. Many of the older teachers had left, busy with their own work. But those who mattered most were still present: Aizawa, the homeroom teacher of Class 1A, the Class 1B homeroom teacher, and of course, Midnight. Normally, Midnight would have returned to Saitama where her office was located, but upon hearing that the meeting was about Kaminari, she decided to stay. All right, Principal Nizu said as the recordings finished playing. What do you all think? All Might's expression was unusually serious, while Aizawa remained contemplative. Chapter 50, Grace and Self-Recommendation. Vlad, the homeroom teacher of Class B, stroked his chin thoughtfully, nodding in agreement. If this kid continues to grow, he'll be a force to reckon with, whether as a hero or, well, something else. The principal, Nizu, cut in, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced with a more serious tone. Exactly why we need to keep a close watch on Kaminari Denki. He's walking a fine line, and it's our responsibility to guide him, make sure he doesn't stray from the right path. But how? Aizawa asked, glancing briefly at All Might. We can't treat him too differently from the other students. Singling him out could make things worse. All Might offered a sheepish smile before adopting a more serious expression. Those who don't follow the rules are considered trash, but those who don't value life are worse than trash. Kaminari's philosophy that you should give everything your best effort and accept the outcome no matter what is noble. But when he says he'd prioritize saving a partner over protecting a city, I can't say whether that's right or wrong. He trailed off, unsure of how to reconcile this dilemma. According to the code of hero conduct, the greater good, the city's safety should come first. But deep down, All Might knew that if he were in Kaminari's shoes, he would have made the same choice. The difference, of course, was that All Might had the ability to do both, save the city and protect his partner. Kaminari, still just a student, would face far more pressure. Kaminari is the type to follow his heart, Aizawa said. When things get critical, he'll abandon the rules if he feels it's the right thing to do. We saw it when he used his quirk illegally to save that old man in Omiya Park. He didn't hesitate, didn't think about the consequences. He just acted. Midnight, recalling her first encounter with Kaminari at the park, nodded in agreement. Exactly. He's a rule breaker when it comes to emergencies. That can be both his strength and his downfall. Aizawa continued, in a way, it's a commendable trait. Acting decisively in the heat of the moment is essential for a hero. But it's also dangerous. If the importance of rules is too light in his mind, he could easily start justifying reckless behavior. At that point, what separates him from the villains? The room fell silent as Aizawa's words hung in the air. Everyone understood the gravity of what he was saying. Nizu leaned forward, his small paws clasped together on the table. Kaminari is, as you've put it, walking a tightrope. He has a strong moral compass, but unless he keeps that compass balanced, he's at risk of falling whether into a life of crime or simply making poor decisions with catastrophic results. Nizu's sharp, strategic mind was already working out solutions. First, we need to strengthen his understanding of the laws and the regulations that guide hero work. He needs to grasp that these rules exist not to restrict him, but to protect him and the people he saves. We should assign him a professional hero who can frequently check in with him, someone to guide him in navigating the gray areas that come up in the field. The teachers nodded in agreement, understanding the need for a mentor. Second, Nizu continued, we should work on building up his respect and trust for the hero society. If we can make him feel more connected to the broader hero network, he'll be less likely to go rogue. Finally, Aizawa, I'd like you to expand your teaching. Include some case studies on the darker side of villainy, things we normally cover in the second year. Kaminari needs to see the consequences of unchecked power and lawlessness. Understood, Aizawa replied. He was always willing to adapt his methods to help his students. Now, we just need to figure out which teacher can keep regular contact with Kaminari, Nizu said, glancing around the room. For a moment, no one spoke. All Might, who had brought up the issue, remained silent. He already had his hands full with Midoriya and couldn't take on the responsibility of mentoring Kaminari as well. Just when it seemed no one would step up, Midnight raised her hand with a confident smile. I'll do it. I live in Saitama, same as Kaminari, and I've seen him jogging in Omiya Park in the mornings. It wouldn't be hard for me to chat with him from time to time. Plus, I think he's already comfortable with me. Nizu nodded approvingly. Thank you, Midnight. Just remember to ask Kaminari for his contact information directly. We can't disclose that without his permission. Of course, Midnight said, still smiling. I'll talk to him next Monday. Maybe I'll even bump into him on his jog tomorrow. With that, the meeting concluded. Kaminari had officially become a focal point of UA High School's attention, though he remained blissfully unaware of this fact. At that very moment, he was at the Yaeorozu estate, sipping high-end tea while being tutored in electromagnetism by the ever-enthusiastic Yaeorozu Momo. As the clock struck 7, the butler gently reminded Momo that it was time to wrap up. She reluctantly set down the retractable pointer she'd been using to illustrate concepts, while Kaminari, after 2 hours of intense focus, let out a relieved sigh. Learning electromagnetism from Yaeorozu was no easy task, though he couldn't deny how much he appreciated her effort. Thank you, Yaeorozu-san, Kaminari said earnestly, bowing his head slightly. You've been standing and teaching for 2 hours straight. I really appreciate it. Earlier, Kaminari had suggested she sit, but Yaeorozu had insisted on standing, saying, I'm the teacher today, so I should look the part. Her dedication left him both impressed and touched. Yaeorozu smiled warmly. It's no trouble at all. I'm happy to help. Kaminari, grateful beyond words, silently vowed to repay the kindness of the Yaoyorozu family one day. He couldn't shake the feeling that their generosity letting their daughter tutor him so freely came with an unspoken understanding. Whatever the reason, he knew he owed them. If I ever get the chance, I'll make sure to repay this favor, Kaminari thought to himself. The bond between him and the Yaoyorozu family had deepened. Yaoyorozu interrupted his thoughts with a question. Kaminari, would it be alright if I joined Jiro's band? Kaminari blinked in surprise. You want to be in the band? Do you play any instruments? She shook her head. No, I'm not really good with musical instruments. Then why? Kaminari asked, confused. She smiled sweetly. I thought I could be the band's manager. It seems like it would be fun, and I'd love to help out. Kaminari hesitated. Why choose us? There are plenty of bands you could manage. Because you're my classmates, she replied softly. And I feel like managing your band would be a wonderful experience. Sometimes, a girl's intuition is all you need. Chapter 51, The Dark Side. Just like the previous night, around 7:30 p.m., with the bright moon already hanging above the treetops, Kaminari returned home, feeling mentally drained. As soon as he opened the door, the familiar smell of food filled his nostrils, and the warm, comforting atmosphere immediately enveloped him. This was what home felt like. It was precisely this feeling that made him willing to take an extra hour-long train ride every day to get back here. My son is home. His mother was the first to notice Kaminari stepping through the door. Perhaps it was the sensitivity unique to women or simply a mother's instinct. Yeah, I'm back, Mom. Hi, Dad, Kaminari greeted while slipping into his bright yellow Pikachu slippers. He then handed his school bag to his mother's waiting hand. This was one of the little ways she showed she cared, so he never refused. Son, you won't believe it. About that Pokemon. His father, clearly excited, was just about to launch into something when his mother cut in, slightly displeased. Talk business later. Our son hasn't even eaten yet. Oh, right, of course. Ha ha ha. Kaminari's dad awkwardly rubbed his nose, realizing he had been a bit too eager. Seeing his loving parents, Kaminari smiled warmly. He changed out of his school uniform into casual clothes, quickly freshened up, and then eagerly dove into the home-cooked dinner his mom had left out for him. In fact, Yaoyorozu had invited him to stay and have dinner at her place, but Kaminari politely declined. He knew that had he stayed, he would have been treated to a lavish meal, the kind he'd likely never experienced before. But, he still preferred his mom's home-cooked meals. Someday, I'll treat my parents to a fancy meal too, he thought to himself as he enjoyed the food. After dinner, his mom gathered the dishes with a gentle expression, while Kaminari settled onto the living room sofa to chat with his dad. Dad, what was it you wanted to tell me about Pokemon? Kaminari asked, his curiosity finally piqued. Ah, right. His father perked up, looking relieved to finally share the news. Our company hit a stroke of luck. You know the Mitsui Corporation, right? Somehow, they found out we were planning to produce a Pokemon comic series, and get this, a rep from Mitsui's animation production branch actually came by. Mitsui, them again. Kaminari's expression darkened with suspicion. He recalled how Mitsui had unexpectedly taken over the production of hero costumes, and now this? But I don't remember knowing anyone at Mitsui. He muttered to himself. Unaware of his son's unease, his father continued, beaming as he occasionally took sips from his coffee. They offered to partner with us on producing Pokemon, saying they could animate it and handle broadcasting on major TV networks. Kaminari remained calm and asked, and what do they want in return? His dad, eyes gleaming, said, that's the thing. There are no real conditions. They only ask that we cover the animation costs, and they're offering a 20% discount. Can you believe it? It's practically a gift. Animation pricing is usually calculated by the second, and on top of that, Mitsui's covering the broadcasting. It's unbelievable. Kaminari leaned back, thinking carefully. But, Dad, have you considered why Mitsui is offering something so generous? His father nodded, looking serious for a moment. I have. I've been in business for years, of course I thought about it. I even had a lawyer review the contract, and there's nothing shady in it. So, I figured, why not take advantage of their offer? Kaminari nodded slowly. If that were the case, then there really wasn't any reason to refuse. All right, Dad. I trust you. With your experience, I'm sure you'll handle it without falling into any traps. His father laughed heartily, clearly pleased. What father wouldn't love to hear his son express confidence and admiration for him? At that moment, Kaminari cleared his throat. Actually, I have something I wanted to talk to you about too. Oh? What's that? Well, I've decided to form a band with 2 of my female classmates. We've even come up with a name, the Pikachu Band, Kaminari said, grinning. Wait, female classmates? His mom, who had just finished tidying the kitchen and walked into the living room, immediately perked up. She rushed to sit beside him, her eyes wide with curiosity. Tell me, what kind of girls are they? Do you have any photos? Well, this wasn't surprising. In Japan, families are often more relaxed. As long as their children are in high school, dating isn't frowned upon. In some more open-minded families, particularly those with sons, parents might even encourage their kids to find a girlfriend. Kaminari chuckled at his mom's enthusiasm, shaking his head with a helpless smile. Mom, it's not what you think. We're just classmates who like my music, so we decided to form a little band. Oh, honey, you don't understand. His mom's usually gentle expression was suddenly filled with pride. My son is so talented and handsome. There's no way these girls don't have other thoughts about you after spending time together. Her tone was filled with certainty. Okay, Kaminari's dad chimed in, pulling his wife gently back toward him. Let the boy finish. Kaminari smiled and continued. Anyway, I wrote a song for our band. I want it to be our debut track, and it's themed around Pokemon. His father immediately caught on. Ah, I see. You want to use that song as the theme for our Pokemon animation, don't you? Kaminari nodded, and his dad, already thinking it over, said, that could work. We'd need to discuss it with Mitsui, of course, but if your song fits well, I'm sure we could make it happen. His dad seemed determined. Even though Mitsui was the partner, he was clearly ready to fight for his son's opportunity. As long as Kaminari's song wasn't terrible, he was confident he could persuade Mitsui to go with it, even if they had a theme of their own in mind. Was this a shady tactic? Perhaps. But Kaminari's dad knew that in this world, things weren't always fair. Chapter 52, Kyoka and Momo. But didn't you say earlier that you weren't ready to make your debut yet? Kaminari's dad asked, puzzled. Kaminari didn't deny it and explained, that's true. We're not officially debuting. We're just a school band, more like a club. We only release songs occasionally, and we don't plan on doing any performances until after we graduate. But basic promotion is still necessary, Kaminari continued. You know, things like member posters, song previews, that sort of thing. Yaeorozu Momo's family will probably handle most of that. Wait, did you just say Yaeorozu? Both his mom and dad perked up immediately. The Yaeorozu family was one of the wealthiest in Japan, easily rivaling the Mitsui family. Kaminari hesitated before replying, yet, one of the 2 female classmates I mentioned before is the eldest daughter of the Yaeorozu family. She's agreed to be the manager of our band. He hesitated because he knew this information could overwhelm his parents. In a socially stratified place like Japan, families like the Yaeorozus weren't just wealthy, they were practically royalty. The influence and power they wielded were very real, especially to people like his parents, who had lived their entire lives navigating the complexities of society. For a moment, his parents just stared at each other, processing what they'd heard. Then his dad let out a hearty laugh and said, well, son, you're doing great. Yeah, we're proud of you. His mom chimed in, her face full of encouragement. Kaminari sighed internally. This isn't what I meant. He thought, feeling slightly worn out by the misunderstanding. Anyway, Dad, Kaminari changed the subject, tomorrow's Sunday, and I was thinking of bringing my bandmates to the company around noon. We'll meet with Dahu to record a new song. Sounds good. His dad said enthusiastically. I'll call the cleaning crew right away and have them tidy up the office tomorrow morning. Though he wasn't exactly thrilled about the idea of the eldest daughter of the Yaeorozu family visiting his company, Kaminari's dad still saw it as an opportunity, a rare one at that. Hey, son, his mom suddenly interjected, if you can, bring them over to the house sometime. Sure, if there's time, Kaminari said, though he didn't make any promises. By the way, his dad asked, "What's the name of your new song?" "The title is Gotta Catch 'Em All." Kaminari replied with a grin. Dash. The next day, March 4th, was the first weekend break since Kaminari and his classmates had started their school year. Finally, a chance to relax. It was around 11 a.m. The early spring sun was warm but not overpowering, and a gentle breeze made the weather feel perfect. The kind of day where couples would want to go out and enjoy themselves. Kaminari was standing near the entrance of the subway station closest to his dad's company, watching couples stroll by with mild amusement. He wasn't there to people watch though, he was waiting for Kyoka. As for Yaoyorozu Momo, Kaminari was pretty sure she wouldn't take the subway. She'd probably show up in a luxury car any minute now. And sure enough, as the saying goes, speak of the devil and he shall appear. Kaminari spotted Momo stepping out of an expensive car. Kaminari. "Hey, Momo," Kaminari greeted her, a little puzzled as he looked at her outfit. "Why are you dressed so formally?" Momo was wearing a sleek, custom-tailored business suit, looking completely out of place for a casual band meet-up. "This is formal," she said with a proud smile, looking down at her fitted suit. "As the band's manager, I'm meeting your uncle at the company today, so of course I have to dress the part." She twirled playfully and asked, "What do you think? Do I look good?" Her polished appearance had already attracted plenty of attention from passers-by, particularly from men who weren't even trying to be subtle, much to the dismay of the women they were with. "You look great," Kaminari replied, though honestly, with her natural elegance, Momo would have looked amazing even in regular clothes. Just then, another voice called out, "Kaminari." Kaminari turned to see Kyoka climbing the subway stairs, carrying a large base case over her shoulder. She was a bit out of breath, a sheen of sweat glistening on her forehead. "Here, let me take that," Kaminari said, stepping forward to grab the base case from her. Kyoka didn't protest, just gave him a shy smile. However, when her eyes landed on Momo, she froze momentarily before quickly returning to her usual self. Who's this?" Kyoka asked, eyeing Momo curiously. "Wait, Kaminari didn't tell you?" Momo asked in surprise, glancing at Kaminari. She extended a hand to Kyoka, introducing herself. "I'm joining the Pikachu band as the manager. It's nice to meet you." "Ah, right. Sorry, I didn't expect this," Kyoka said, a bit flustered, but quickly shook Momo's hand. They were classmates, after all, though Kyoka couldn't help but feel slightly out of place. Seeing Kyoka's discomfort, Kaminari scratched his head awkwardly. "Yeah, sorry about that. I meant to tell you last night, but I got caught up talking to my dad." "It's fine," Kyoka replied with a small smile, though she still felt like she had forgotten something. Just then, she remembered that there was someone else she hadn't told about today's plans. "Kazama." "I'm sorry," Kyoka thought guiltily, realizing she hadn't updated her good friend, who was miles away. "I'll explain everything to Kaminari later." Chapter 53, The Mysterious Boy. With two beautiful girls each with her own distinct style walking beside him, Kaminari strolled down the street, attracting envious glares from the men around. "Well, even though I'm not an adult yet, this feels pretty good," Kaminari chuckled inwardly. It wasn't that he had romantic feelings for either of them, but come on, what boy wouldn't feel a little proud in this situation? Suddenly, a commotion erupted in front of them. "My bag! He stole my bag!" Kaminari, Kyoka, and Momo turned their heads to see a man wearing a cat-like mask sprinting past them, clutching a woman's handbag. Behind him, a middle-aged woman in a red dress, teetering on high heels, was chasing after him, yelling for help between labored breaths. "Kaminari!" Both Momo and Kyoka glanced at him expectantly, but Kaminari just shook his head and pulled them to the side, watching the thief dash by. "We should leave this to the patrolling heroes or the police," Kaminari whispered. "By law, we're not allowed to use our quirks on people unless it's an emergency. And without quirks, we'd probably get hurt trying to stop him." This wasn't like the time they'd saved the elderly man. Back then, it was a matter of life and death, and Kaminari hadn't hesitated to break the rules. But for something like petty theft, there was no reason to get involved and risk trouble. "Hey, it's broad daylight, and you're grabbing bags," a new voice called out. A boy with messy purple hair and narrow, triangular eyes stood calmly watching the cat-headed thief approach. Kaminari frowned, sizing him up. What's he planning to do? Use his quirk? He doesn't look like a pro hero. The boy appeared to be around the same age as Kaminari, so he probably wasn't licensed to intervene either. Is he just another hot-headed kid trying to be a hero? Kaminari wondered. The thief, now looking more desperate, snarled and raised his left hand, his nails suddenly growing long and sharp, clearly dangerous. Seeing this, Kaminari discreetly took out a 100 yen coin from his pocket, prepared to use it if things got out of hand. But to his surprise, the purple-haired boy didn't do anything. He simply stepped aside and let the thief run by, just like Kaminari had. The onlookers let out a collective sigh of relief, though many shot the boy disapproving looks. If you're not going to do anything, why pretend to be brave? Some muttered. Kaminari also relaxed, letting the coin fall back into his palm. He was just about to leave with Momo and Kyoka when the boy spoke again. Stop! Don't move! The crowd snickered at his words. Here we go again, someone chuckled. Does he really think the thief is just going to stop because he said so? But, strangely enough, the thief did stop. Less than 10 meters away from the purple-haired boy, the thief froze in place, unable to move. His eyes darted around in panic as if something invisible was holding him back, his body refusing to obey his commands. Just stay there. The police or a hero will come for you soon, the boy said calmly. Then, turning to the crowd, he added, don't touch him until they arrive. Without waiting for a response, the boy turned and walked away, leaving everyone including Kaminari and his friends staring in shock. Within minutes, several heroes and police officers arrived on the scene. They found the thief still standing frozen, looking bewildered. First time I've seen a thief who doesn't try to run, one hero remarked as he approached, handcuffs at the ready. As soon as the handcuffs clicked around the thief's wrists, his body unfroze, and he collapsed to the ground in confusion. He seemed just as surprised as everyone else. What just happened? Kaminari muttered to himself as they continued walking toward his father's company. He couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious boy and his strange quirk. This is the first time I've seen an ability like that. It was almost like mind control, Kaminari thought, replaying the scene in his head. Based on the distance, it seems like he can control people from afar, Kaminari mused. But there's got to be some kind of limit. If not, his quirk would be way too powerful, almost unfairly so. Kaminari also thought about his teacher, Aizawa's quirk, which could erase powers from a distance. But while Aizawa could stop someone's abilities temporarily, the boy's power seemed to completely immobilize his target. Kaminari, are you still thinking about that boy? Momo asked, breaking his concentration. Yeah, Kaminari admitted. His quirk was seriously impressive. I'm trying to figure out how it worked. If I ever run into him again, I'd like to ask. I think I've seen him at school before, Kyoka said suddenly, surprising Kaminari. Wait, you've seen him at U.A? Kaminari asked, his interest piqued. Is he from Class B? No, I know everyone in Class B. He must be in one of the other departments, Kyoka replied thoughtfully. That's hard to believe, Kaminari said, thinking it over. With a quirk that strong, he'd have no trouble getting into the hero course. But then Kaminari remembered how strict the entrance exam had been. Actually, I guess his quirk might not be suited for the kind of combat they test for during the exam. Still, it makes me wonder why UA doesn't consider abilities like his more carefully. By this time, the three of them had arrived at Kaminari's father's office building. Momo looked up at the structure and smiled. Kaminari, your family's company is pretty big. It feels like one of our headquarters. Kaminari chuckled awkwardly. Actually, we only occupy 2 floors. Pfft. Kyoka burst into laughter, her earlier tension melting away. All right, let's head inside. Kaminari said, leading the way into the building. Meanwhile, in Shizuoka Prefecture, a blue-haired boy sat quietly, staring at his phone on the desk in front of him, waiting for a message. Kyoka, did you forget to mention me to Kaminari again? He murmured to himself. Behind him stood a brand new electronic keyboard, waiting silently, just like its owner waiting for its first sound to be heard. Chapter 54, Initial Completion. Ding! The elevator doors slid open smoothly, revealing a bustling but orderly office space. Men and women in sharp suits moved efficiently around the area, each focused on their respective tasks. The low hum of work filled the air, Faint conversations as files were exchanged, the sound of ringing phones promptly answered, and the rhythmic clicking of keyboards typing out reports. When the nearby employees spotted Kaminari and his friends, they greeted him with warm, familiar smiles but nothing too formal. After all, they'd seen him countless times over the years, he was the president's son, after all. Looks like Dad didn't mention anything about Momo, Kaminari mused quietly as he led Kyoka and Momo toward the president's office. Wow! Momo exclaimed softly, her eyes lighting up with interest as she took in the surroundings. Kaminari, your family's company is really focused on Pikachu. There are so many of them around here. Yeah, it's like Pikachu paradise, Kyoka added, nodding toward the large 2-meter-high Pikachu posters that adorned the walls, along with various Pikachu-themed merchandise and stickers scattered throughout the office. Hey, what are those? Kyoka asked, pointing toward some posters near the floor-to-ceiling windows. They don't look like Pikachu. Kaminari and Momo followed her gaze. The posters showed 3 unfamiliar Pokémon, each with a Pokeball hovering above their heads, all in vibrant colors and unique shapes. Oh, those, Kaminari said with a smile. Those are the starter Pokémon. The red one is Charmander, a fire type. The little turtle is Squirtle, a water type, and the green one over there is Bulbasaur, a grass type. Shoo, ba? What does that mean? Kyoka asked, tilting her head, her confusion making her look rather adorable. Kaminari chuckled. That's just the species name for Pikachu and the others. They're what we call basic Pokémon. Of course, Kaminari didn't mention that he had drawn these characters himself, at least, the original 3. Beyond those, he'd created basic sketches of several Pokémon and planned to leave the rest of the designs to his mother and a team of professional cartoonists. They're really interesting designs. Momo said, clearly impressed. As someone with a keen business sense, she quickly grasped the potential behind what Kaminari's family was doing. Just Pikachu alone had built a successful company. Expanding it into an entire Pokémon world with multiple characters. The possibilities were endless. Son. Kaminari's father appeared, having just been notified by his secretary that they had arrived. He strode over to greet them, his eyes lighting up as he took in the sight of Momo and Kyoka. Well, mostly Momo, he was eager to meet the young lady from the prestigious Yaeorozu family. Dad, this is Kyokajiro and Momo Yaeorozu, Kaminari introduced them formally. They're my classmates and members of the Pikachu band. Ah, very nice to meet you. Kaminari's dad said, beaming. Such lovely young ladies. Please take good care of Kaminari. Hello, sir, Momo and Kyoka replied politely, both bowing in greeting. Kaminari's father practically glowed with pride. His son was clearly doing well, not only starting a band but also bringing home such charming and capable friends. He couldn't help but think Kaminari was already much more accomplished than he had been at his age. Let's head down to the recording studio on the 2nd floor, his dad said, pointing to the elevator. Dahu should have everything set up for you. He led the way, eager to hear the song Kaminari had composed as the potential theme for their first animation project. Given the success of Kaminari's earlier work, he wasn't too worried, it would probably be great. Soon, they arrived at the recording studio, which was sleek and well equipped. Dahu, who was in charge of the technical side, had clearly taken his role seriously today. Instead of lounging around playing with his phone like usual, he was wearing a neat light blue suit, his hair carefully styled, and he even had a pair of glasses that added a touch of professionalism. All right, Kaminari's father said as they settled into the studio. They all gathered around a low-glass coffee table, sinking into the soft leather couches. Before we dive into the song, how much do you two know about Pokémon? Kyoka and Momo exchanged glances, then shook their heads. Momo answered, honestly, we don't know much beyond Pikachu and the few characters Kaminari just introduced. Kaminari's father smiled, not at all surprised. After all, Pokémon hadn't officially launched yet, so there wasn't much for them to know. That's all right, he said, reaching for a tablet on the table. He tapped a few buttons before handing it to them. Take a look at this. It'll give you a good idea of what the series is about. Kyoka and Momo leaned in, curious. The screen displayed a black and white comic cover featuring Pikachu perched on a young boy's shoulder, clearly a younger version of Kaminari himself, though with a much more cute and playful look compared to his real-life self. Wait, the manga's already out? Kaminari asked, surprised. Haha, Not quite, his dad laughed. We've only got the first 2 chapters finished. It'll take a while before the whole series is ready. Momo picked up the tablet and scooted closer to Kyoka, both of them intrigued. They hadn't expected Pokemon to feature Kaminari as the main character. This is so weird, Kyoka said with a smile, her eyes sparkling as she glanced at the chibi version of Kaminari on the screen. It's the first time I've known someone who became a comic book protagonist. Momo giggled as well. So, if this comic becomes popular, will we start seeing Kaminari merchandise, too? Maybe figurines? Kaminari and his dad exchanged glances, both realizing that this could very well be a possibility. Kaminari turned back to the girls, grinning. If they make figures of me, would you guys buy them? Definitely. Kyoka blurted out, then immediately blushed, realizing how quickly she'd responded. She tried to hide her embarrassment with a sheepish smile, while Momo laughed beside her. Chapter 55, Midnight, Early Morning, Birdsong. Ha ha ha. Kaminari's father burst into laughter. It looks like we won't have to worry about the sales of Kaminari's merchandise in the future. However, Momo had a different take on it. We're classmates, and we're also part of the same band. Shouldn't Kaminari's merchandise be gifted to us? Haha, of course. Absolutely. Kaminari's father replied enthusiastically. Whenever we launch new products, you two will be the first to get them. At that moment, Kaminari, staring at the tablet, suddenly had an idea. Dad, what if we added these two, he gestured to Momo and Kyoka, into the manga? They could go on adventures with me and Pikachu. Momo and Kyoka exchanged a glance, surprised but intrigued by the idea. It actually sounded pretty fun. Kaminari's father scratched his head, thinking for a moment. I'd have to run it by Junichi, our writer, and of course, we'd need to check with the Mitsui Corporation, too. I can't give you an answer just yet. You guys finish reading those 2 chapters first, then let's start recording the song, he added, standing up. I'll have my secretary check on it in the meantime. He had a good feeling about this idea, though. After all, the comic was still in its early stages. Adding new characters or tweaking the storyline wouldn't be too difficult. Plus, having characters based on actual UA students would be a massive draw. UA High school was legendary in Japan, the dream school for so many young kids. Just the idea of a comic that featured real hero course students from UA would send excitement through the roof. Uncle, I'll need to check with my family about this too, Momo said apologetically. As the eldest daughter of the Yaeyorozua family, she couldn't just decide something like this on her own. Her family would definitely need to approve any public use of their name or image. Of course, that makes sense, Kaminari's father nodded in understanding. About 10 minutes later, after finishing the first 2 chapters of the Pokemon manga, Kyoka and Momo leaned back, digesting what they'd read. The story was definitely different from what Kaminari remembered from his past life, but for now, it still captured the same spirit of adventure and discovery. So, it's about this 10-year-old kid named Denki who goes on a journey with Pikachu, Momo summarized. They travel together, meeting other Pokemon and battling along the way. Kyoka nodded thoughtfully. The theme song you've prepared, it must fit with that magical, adventurous vibe, right? Exactly. Kaminari said, standing up and clapping his hands. Alright, let's get started. I'll do a solo run first, and then we can record it together. He handed a USB drive to Daigo and reminded him, this one's a bit different from my usual songs. It'll need some extra work in post-production. Dahu, who was already in full work mode, nodded. Got it, he said, fully understanding the task ahead. Kaminari grabbed his guitar affectionately nicknamed Pikachu and headed into the recording booth. Kyoka and Momo stood by the glass window, watching him as he set up. Do you notice how different Kaminari seems when he picks up the guitar? Kyoka whispered to Momo. His whole vibe changes. Momo nodded, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. He's completely focused. It's the same way he gets when we're studying together. She smiled slightly, recalling how serious Kaminari could be when he put his mind to something. Kyoka just stared at Momo, her words sinking in. Somehow, that comparison made her feel weird. Maybe a bit jealous, though she couldn't quite place why. Meanwhile, in a hero agency office in Saitama City, Midnight the sultry and fierce pro-hero was seated at her desk, staring intently at nothing in particular. The steaming cup of green matcha tea beside her was completely ignored as she lost herself in deep thought. What exactly was that technique? She wondered. Why did it feel so dangerous? Her mind drifted back to early that morning, just before dawn, around 6 o'clock. She'd been at Omiya Park, under the pretense of jogging, secretly hoping to run into Kaminari. She wasn't there to flirt, but as his educator, she felt it was her responsibility to check in on him. She had dressed down for the occasion, simple white athletic wear, nothing too revealing. She wanted to keep it professional, despite her usual reputation for sultriness. She had taken her role as Kaminari's mentor seriously and opted for something more practical than provocative. In truth, she'd gone there hoping to accidentally run into Kaminari. And she did, but not in the way she expected. She spotted him running not at the park's entrance, but deeper inside, where fewer people usually went. Curious, and sensing something unusual, she trailed him from a distance, her instincts as a hero kicking in. At first, she thought he was just out for a jog, but something about the direction he was heading seemed off. He was moving toward a secluded area, which immediately raised her suspicions. Choosing to stay back, Midnight activated her most basic tracking techniques, keeping herself hidden as she followed him into the thick, quiet woods. But then, to her surprise, she lost him. How? There was no way he could have just disappeared. There were no paths, just a small trail lined with cherry blossoms. Puzzled, she scanned the area but found no sign of him. That's when she heard it. A faint crackling sound, like electricity, coming from deeper within the trees. It wasn't loud, but in the silence of the forest, it stood out clearly. Following the sound cautiously, she came across a clearing, and what she saw next made her heart skip a beat. Hidden behind a tree, she peeked out to see Kaminari standing in the middle of the clearing, his right hand crackling with a bright, intense electrical charge. The sheer concentration of power in his palm sent a chill down her spine. What is that? She whispered to herself, watching in awe as golden lightning flickered and sparked from his hand. She had seen Kaminari use electricity before, but this was something else entirely. There was a palpable sense of danger in the air, a feeling she only got when she was near someone truly powerful. Before she could react, the crackling stopped. Kaminari lowered his hand, a look of frustration and disappointment on his face as he muttered to himself, failed again. I was so close. Midnight's mind raced. What exactly had she just witnessed? Chapter 56, The Drummer and the Alarm. Recently, the news of All Might taking up his position at UA High School had begun to create ripples after fermenting for the past few days. Well, if you looked at the reporters swarming the school gates, you could see the impact. These journalists had been stationed outside since noon the previous day, creating quite the commotion. Needless to say, it was causing a bit of an inconvenience for both teachers and students at UA. Every time someone stepped outside the school, they were bombarded with questions about All Might. The constant barrage of inquiries was enough to irritate anyone. Of course, the nearby hotels, restaurants, and food stalls were thrilled with the situation. The surge of business from the reporters camping out meant they were making a killing over the past couple of days. But all of this had little to do with Kaminari and his friends, who were now sitting in the school cafeteria, enjoying their lunch. Why? Because everyone knew that no matter how loud the reporters shouted outside, they couldn't set foot inside UA's grounds. It was the fourth class of the day, one taught by their homeroom teacher, Aizawa. All right, let's get to the point of today's class meeting, Aizawa began in his usual monotone voice. Sorry to rush things, but today I'd like to. Before he could finish his sentence, the entire class tensed up, memories of their brutal first day of school still fresh in their minds. Decide on the class representative. Everyone collectively sighed in relief. At least this was a normal school activity for once. Suddenly, Kirishima leapt to his feet with a loud bang, his chair screeching across the floor as he exclaimed, I want to be the class rep. Let me do it. Isn't this a role fit for me? Aoyama said narcissistically, flipping his golden hair with flair. Ha! It's obviously mine. Bakugo growled, his face full of murderous intent. The whole class buzzed with excitement. Well, everyone except Kaminari, Todoroki, Midoriya, and a few others, who remained calm. Class rep, hey. I'm not interested, Kaminari muttered to himself, staring lazily at the ceiling. He knew that being the class rep in the hero course was a far more prestigious position than it was in any ordinary school. It could even be considered an important stepping stone toward becoming a top hero in the future. But Kaminari's goal wasn't to become a top hero running his own agency or patrolling the streets day and night. No, his goal was to become the strongest user of lightning-based quirks in the world. Though, if you said that out loud, it might sound pretty similar. Besides, Kaminari already had too much on his plate. Between his band, training, and his own personal ambitions, his days were packed from 5 a.m. to late evening. He didn't need the added responsibility of class representative weighing him down. Isn't there an obvious candidate for this? Kaminari glanced at Ida, who had just stood up to give a lengthy speech on the importance of the class representative role. Eventually, the class agreed to decide on the class rep through a vote. The results? Midoriya Izuku, 3 votes. Kaminari Denki, 3 votes. Yaoyorozu Momo, 2 votes. Everyone else had voted for themselves, naturally. Midoriya was flustered, Ida was disappointed, Kaminari was surprised, and Yaoyorozu smiled. Midoriya and Kaminari tied with 3 votes each. Kirishima said, glancing at Midoriya. I know his punch is powerful, but personality-wise, he's a bit too timid. Wait a second, who voted for me? Ida asked suddenly, looking around with confusion. Hey? Didn't you vote for yourself? Kirishima responded, puzzled. No, I voted for Yaoyorozu, Ida said earnestly. I believe she's the most qualified for the position. Kirishima stared at him, bewildered. But you want to be class rep. Why wouldn't you vote for yourself? I voted for him, Kaminari said, interrupting the conversation. Instantly, all eyes were on him including Ida's, who was now gazing at him with deeply moved eyes. Kaminari-san, thank you. Ida said, looking like he had just received the highest form of validation. Kaminari, you don't want to be class rep? Kyoka asked, her head tilted in confusion. Kaminari shrugged. Yeah, I'm not really interested in it. I honestly think Ida's the best person for the job. Kaminari-san. Ida was practically glowing with pride. Even if he didn't become the class rep, knowing that he had earned Kaminari's respect filled him with satisfaction. Someday, I'll be as great as you. Kaminari gave Ida a puzzled look, wondering why he was so fired up all of a sudden. It's all right, Kaminari-san, Ida continued, standing up and giving his usual dramatic salute. I suggested the voting system, and so I will respect the outcome of the vote. Are the results finalized yet? Aizawa asked from where he was lying on the floor, cocooned in his sleeping bag. If so, hurry it up. With Kaminari voluntarily stepping down, the final results named Midoriya as the class representative, and Yaoyorozu Momo as his deputy. Though Midoriya was visibly trembling at the responsibility, the roles were officially set. When the class ended, it was time for lunch. Everyone, except for Aoyama who insisted on eating his French cuisine in the classroom, made their way to the cafeteria. Kaminari, has your band finished recording the first song yet? Ashido Mina asked excitedly as she put down her silver spoon. She was clearly eager to hear it. The other girls Yurika, Azui and the rest also turned their attention to Kaminari, looking at him, Kyoka, and Momo with anticipation. They were more than a little envious. Yeah, it's almost done, Kaminari replied with a smile. Once the post-production is finished, it'll be uploaded to Japan's MTV website. You can just search for Pikachu Band, and you'll be able to find our exclusive page and listen to it there. When it's up, I'll send you all the link, he added casually, then turned to Kyoka. By the way, Kyoka, how's that friend of yours? The one who plays the electronic keyboard. Kazama? He was really enthusiastic about it, Kyoka said, nodding. I'll give you his number later, and you can chat with him directly. He's a bit lazy, but he's great with the keyboard, she added with a small smirk. Probably better than me. Momo took a sip of her tea, setting down the cup delicately before saying, now we just need a drummer. Kaminari nodded in agreement. He knew how important a drummer was to a band, but he didn't want just anyone. It had to be someone who clicked with the group, not just someone skilled. Anyone here know how to play drums? Kaminari asked, glancing around the table at his classmates. Tetsu, Kirishima and the others exchanged awkward glances, but no one spoke up. Kaminari sighed, a bit disappointed. He really hoped to form a band entirely made up of fellow students. None of them noticed Bakugo, sitting alone, who glanced at Kaminari with an odd look in his eyes. He frowned slightly, then returned to eating his lunch, muttering to himself. Like I'd ever play drums for you. Suddenly, a sharp alarm rang out, breaking the casual chatter in the cafeteria. A voice came over the loudspeaker, calm yet firm. Security level 3 has been breached. Please evacuate to the outside of the building immediately. Ida, always the quick thinker, turned to the upperclassman sitting nearby and asked, what does security level 3 mean? It means someone has broken into the school building, the upperclassman replied urgently. This hasn't happened in the 3 years I've been here. He immediately stood and rushed toward the exit. The entire class sprang into action, heading for the door, but Kaminari stayed put, his brow furrowed. He grabbed Kyoka and Momo by the arms before they could join the rush. Hold on. Don't go charging in. It's dangerous. He warned. Having lived through several incidents like this in his previous life, Kaminari was particularly sensitive to the dangers of large crowds in emergencies. But if there's an intruder, shouldn't we? Tetsu started, looking anxious. No need to panic, Kaminari said firmly. There are pro-heroes here, dozens of them. And don't forget, All Might is here too. He gestured toward the congested entrance where people were crowding in panic. Even if there's an invasion, rushing outside won't do you any good. And look, they're already packed so tight they can't even move. If a villain attacks, they'll be sitting ducks. Chapter 57, Rescue. What should we do now? Tetsu asked anxiously, looking at the chaos unfolding in front of him as the crowd at the exit grew more and more frantic. No one immediately answered his question. Kaminari, Momo, and Kyoka were all thinking deeply. In an emergency like this, it was important to stay calm and find a quick solution. I've got it! Kaminari exclaimed after a moment, clapping his hands together as an idea struck him. The sound drew the attention of the group, and he turned to Kyoka. Do you have a music player on you? He asked. Yeah, I do. Kyoka nodded and pulled out her small MP3 player. Kaminari then shifted his gaze to Momo. Can you create a boombox? Momo's eyes lit up as she understood his plan instantly. You want to calm everyone down by playing loud music. Exactly. Kaminari confirmed with a grin. The crowd is in complete chaos. We need something to snap them out of it and help them regain their composure. Great idea. I'll get started right away. Momo said enthusiastically. Without hesitation, Momo began to roll up the sleeve of her uniform, revealing the spot on her arm where she could generate objects. Kaminari and Tetsu immediately turned away, their faces flushing with embarrassment at the sudden movement though, in the end, they realized they'd misunderstood her actions. Momo smirked at their reaction as she used her quirk. A small tent-like structure emerged, covering her while she worked. A few moments later, she emerged from the tent with a sleek, white boombox in hand. It had a modern design, simple but stylish. All right, let's go. Kaminari urged as he handed the MP3 player to Kyoka, who quickly plugged it into the boombox. What song should we play? Kyoka asked, looking up. Obviously, my song Hero. Kaminari replied without hesitation. It's got a fast beat, perfect for the situation. Kyoka connected the player, and soon, the powerful melody of electric guitars and drums filled the air, booming from the speakers at full volume. As Kaminari's song started playing, it seemed like they had grabbed some attention but not quite enough. Everyone's focus quickly shifted elsewhere. It wasn't the music that caught their attention. It was Ida. In a surprising move, Ida had leapt into the air above the frantic crowd, his legs lifting as the exhaust pipes on the back of his calves began to release jets of air. Engine! Propulsion! Ida shouted, his body moving with precision as he soared over the crowd. Kaminari's song suddenly became Ida's heroic background music, as all eyes turned to him. Seriously? Kaminari muttered, watching as Ida became the unintentional star of the show. Wasn't the music supposed to be what grabbed everyone's attention? Ida, oblivious to the music, was in the zone. He felt like he was embodying everything his older brother, the hero ingenium, would do in this situation. Be calm, be concise, be bold. Ida reminded himself as he flipped mid-air, landing dramatically against the wall above the exit. Coincidentally or perhaps fatefully his legs had landed right in front of the emergency exit sign. The green glow of the exit symbol beneath him made it look like Ida was part of the sign itself, perfectly mimicking the little green figure pointing the way. What is going on? Kaminari said, utterly speechless. This was supposed to be his moment. But Ida wasn't finished. Despite the awkward landing, he raised his voice above the noise of the crowd and even above Kaminari's song, shouting with all his might. Everyone! Calm down! Ida's voice boomed through the cafeteria, even overpowering the music for a moment. His commanding tone, paired with his bold actions, silenced the panic-stricken students. The once chaotic atmosphere shifted as everyone turned to listen. It's just the media. There's no need to panic. Ida declared, standing tall. We're students of U.A, the top hero school. We need to act like it. As if on cue, the sound of approaching police sirens filled the air. The reassurance of the police's arrival, combined with Ida's words, helped restore order. The students began to relax, some even laughing in relief. Kaminari, seeing the situation under control, nodded to Kyoka, and she turned off the music. Do you think playing the music actually helped? Kaminari asked, scratching his head. Kyoka, Momo, and Tetsu shared a glance before looking back at Kaminari. It was clear from their expressions that the music had simply become Ida's dramatic background track. Well, maybe not in the way we expected, Momo said, trying to be diplomatic. Kaminari sighed. Yeah, I guess we just gave Ida his theme music. In the end, the situation almost turning into a dangerous stampede due to the reporters breaching U.A.'s security was handled thanks to Ida's quick thinking and, well, Kaminari's music, in a roundabout way. Afterwards, U.A.'s administration took the incident very seriously. They began discussing ways to improve student safety and security, and decided to expand the number of entrances and exits to avoid such situations in the future. However, Principal Nizu seemed more concerned with the damage done to the school's supposedly impenetrable hero gate. A gate that was meant to withstand the force of a tank had been easily breached by a group of overeager reporters. If they were villains, this would have been a declaration of war against us heroes, Nizu said ominously, staring at the shattered remains of the once mighty gate. He knew a storm was brewing. Back in Class 1A, the students resumed their afternoon lessons, seemingly unfazed by the earlier chaos. Interestingly, Midoriya, who had been elected class president, had a change of heart. Standing nervously in front of the class with Momo by his side, Midoriya insisted on stepping down and handing the position to Ida. Though his decision surprised many, it was quickly accepted. With Ida officially promising to dedicate himself to the role of class president, Class 1A's brief leadership crisis came to a close. Today's hero basic training will be overseen by me, All Might, and one other teacher, Aizawa announced from the podium after class. Zero raised his hand, asking curiously, what's the training about? Aizawa wasted no time. He pulled out a small blue card with the word rescue written on it in bold letters and held it up for the class to see. Today's training will focus on rescue operations, responding to natural disasters, floods, and other emergency situations. Rescue training? Hey! Kaminari's interest was piqued. It sounded far more engaging than the usual classroom lectures. The rest of the class also perked up, clearly excited by the prospect of real hero training. After all, this was what they had come to UA for, not just the boring theory lessons of the morning. Aizawa pressed a button, and the walls of the classroom shifted. From hidden compartments, the students' hero costumes appeared, lined up neatly for each one of them. The training ground is a bit far from here, so we'll be taking a bus, Aizawa informed them. Prepare yourselves. It's time to begin. Chapter 58, Tetsu's combat uniform and a surprise. Within 10 minutes, under the energetic command of Class President Ida, the boys and girls of Class 1A, now dressed in their hero costumes, boarded the bus arranged by UA High School in an orderly fashion. It was the same bus that had taken them to the 7 simulated communities during the entrance exam. However, Midoriya was still dressed in his standard gym uniform. His hero costume had been damaged during his fight with Bakugo and was sent to a sponsor company for repairs. Speaking of which, Kaminari, Tetsu, sitting next to Kaminari, spoke up, looking puzzled. All Might mentioned that your current combat uniform was made by your old sponsor, right? What about the new one from the current sponsor? Hasn't that come out yet? Not yet, it seems, Kaminari said, looking down at his current combat uniform, a striking gold and white robe. But honestly, I really like this one. It looks pretty awesome, don't you think? He grinned. It was worth mentioning that just the night before, Kaminari had received a call from a company owned by Mitsui. They wanted to incorporate his gloves into a new hero costume and asked for his approval. Kaminari had consulted his father, called Mitsui for more details, and ultimately agreed to their request. According to Mitsui, they planned to use the blue crystal in his Denki gloves as the core energy source for the new suit. It seemed this energy-storing crystal was a unique invention of Island. Kaminari then glanced over at Tetsu's combat uniform, which resembled a self-defense force uniform, and couldn't help but smirk. "Did you design that yourself? No offense, but it's kinda ugly." Tetsu scratched his head sheepishly. "Actually, my dad designed it. It's made out of iron, so I can literally eat parts of the suit to replenish my iron levels. He also thought military uniforms were the coolest, so that's why it looks like this." Kaminari didn't argue. Military uniforms are the coolest. But as he continued eyeing Tetsu's uniform, another idea struck him. "Hey, what if I designed a new combat uniform for you?" Kaminari suggested, leaning in excitedly. "I could make it super cool, like a military uniform, but way more stylish." Tetsu blinked, surprised by Kaminari's sudden burst of enthusiasm. "Kaminari." He hesitated for a moment but eventually gave in to Kaminari's eager expression. "All right, sure. Of course." Kaminari nodded, grinning widely. "Trust me." Kaminari couldn't help but imagine Tetsu in a sleek, modernized military uniform. That would look so badass, he thought, already excited about the possibilities. Meanwhile, on the other side of the bus, Tsuyu and Kirishima were discussing Midoriya's quirk. Tsuyu thought it seemed similar to All Might's quirk, while Kirishima argued it couldn't be the same since All Might had never gotten hurt using his. This made Kaminari glance over at Midoriya with a strange look. He had a bold theory about Midoriya's quirk, but there wasn't enough evidence yet to support it. Could it really be the same power? He wondered. If it was true, it meant they were in for some incredible and probably dangerous times ahead. "Midoriya, I'll be watching you closely," Kaminari thought to himself, both intrigued and a little concerned. The bus ride passed quickly, and soon enough, they arrived at their destination, a massive structure that resembled the Bird's Nest Stadium from Kaminari's previous life. "Students, I've been waiting for you." A figure in a spacesuit greeted them enthusiastically at the entrance. Kaminari blinked in confusion. He didn't recognize the person. Who the heck is this? Kaminari thought. He spent so much time training and studying quirks, and what little time he had left went into learning guitar. As a result, he wasn't very familiar with many pro heroes, aside from the really famous ones. Fortunately, someone else knew who this was. "It's the space hero, 13. Midoriya exclaimed, clearly excited. "A pro hero who specializes in rescue operations during disaster situations," Midoriya added, almost bouncing with enthusiasm. "I love 13. Eureka squealed, her eyes sparkling with admiration. 13? That's their hero name? What an unlucky number." Kaminari thought, a bit amused but also unimpressed. As Aizawa joined the group, 13 motioned for the students to head inside, as the training session was about to start. "Please, come in," 13 said, welcoming them inside. The class followed 13 and Aizawa into the massive training facility. As soon as they stepped inside, everyone was stunned by the sheer size and complexity of the place. Whoa, whoa, whoa. I knew UA was impressive, but this is on a whole other level." Kaminari muttered, looking around in awe. The place was enormous, with different sections dedicated to various types of disasters. It was hard to believe this was just a part of UA's campus. UA was already massive, with its huge teaching buildings, cafeteria, swimming pools and the expansive 7 simulated communities. And now, this simulated disaster site. Kaminari realized he might have underestimated UA's true scale. If UA is this impressive, what must the hero schools in other countries be like? He wondered, thinking of places like the US, China, and Russia. "The world is probably a lot bigger than I thought," Kaminari mused. 13 began to introduce the facility with pride. "This training ground simulates all kinds of disaster scenarios: floods, landslides, fires, storms, and more. I designed it myself." 13 spread their arms wide. "We call it the Unforeseen Simulation Joint." "The what?" The class mumbled in confusion. "USJ. 13 said, beaming. The class couldn't help but share a collective chuckle at the cheesy abbreviation. Aizawa, hands in his pockets, turned to 13. Where's All Might? 13 leaned in and whispered, he used up all his power on his way here, so he's currently resting in the lounge. Of course. Aizawa muttered, clearly not thrilled. Well, we'll just proceed without him. With that, 13 took over, explaining the purpose of the training. Unlike the combat training you did with All Might, today's session will focus on rescue operations. You'll learn how to use your quirks to save lives during natural disasters and accidents. Your quirks aren't just for fighting. They're meant to save people. 13 said passionately. I hope by the end of this session, you'll truly understand that. 13 finished with a graceful bow. Thank you for listening. The students, especially those familiar with 13, erupted in cheers, clearly excited for the upcoming training. 13's so cool. Midoriya and the others gushed, looking like true fans. Just as Kaminari was about to join in on the excitement, he felt something strange through his wireless earpiece. A strange frequency buzzed in his ear, setting off alarms in his head. Moments later, the lights in the facility flickered and shut off, plunging the room into semi-darkness. The decorative fountains that lined the facility stopped working as well, and an eerie silence fell over the room. Something's wrong, Kaminari thought, his body tensing instinctively. Aizawa's sharp eyes flicked toward the main fountain at the center of the room. In front of the fountain, a swirling vortex of black and purple energy began to form. What the? Kaminari whispered. With a loud pop, the vortex expanded, and from it emerged a hulking figure made of dark energy. From its shadowy form, more figures began to emerge, strange, villainous-looking individuals stepping out of the void. Aizawa's eyes narrowed dangerously, the intensity of a seasoned pro-hero flashing in his gaze. Years of fighting villains had honed his instincts, and this was no simulation. Everyone, stay together and don't move. Aizawa barked, his voice sharp and commanding. He turned to 13. You're in charge of protecting the students. The class stared in disbelief as more figures continued to pour out of the vortex. What are those things? Kirishima asked, confused. Is this part of the training? He guessed. No, Kaminari said, his voice low. This isn't a drill. Aizawa confirmed Kaminari's fears. Those are villains. Kaminari's heart raced. He had been mentally prepared for this kind of danger when he applied for the hero course, but now that it was happening, he couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and anxiety. Is this really happening? Kaminari thought, a real battle. Golden sparks flickered between Kaminari's eyes, his quirk stirring in response to the adrenaline coursing through his veins. His hands crackled softly with electricity as he stared at the dark figures emerging from the portal. Come on, villains. Chapter 59, Disappearance. Does 13 have a quirk similar to Eraserhead's? The purple-black energy entity mused aloud, watching the teachers and students in the distance. His voice dripped with a sinister calm. According to the schedule we intercepted a few days ago, All Might should be here by now. Aizawa's expression grew more serious. The situation was turning more dire by the minute, especially with All Might's absence. He began to suspect that they were in for a far greater challenge than anticipated. They must have made good use of the information they stole, Aizawa muttered, feeling a knot of dread forming in his chest. The villains were too prepared. Teacher, you're not forgetting about us, right? Kaminari's voice cut through the tension as he stared at the approaching swarm of villains with a determined smile. We might not be able to take down the big boss, but we can definitely handle the minions. His words weren't just bravado, they were practical. Kaminari knew his limits. The head-to-heads with the main villain were meant for someone like Aizawa or, ideally, All Might. But dealing with the grunts? That was something they could handle. Although you're usually annoying, I have to say, not bad today. Bakugo grinned viciously, small explosions popping from his hands as he eyed the villains. Invading UA is the dumbest thing these idiots could do. Kirishima and Tetsu, both hardening their bodies in sync, shared a knowing look. Their quirks made them ideal for crowd control. A swarm of weaker villains was the perfect challenge to test their mettle. But just as they were preparing to charge in, Aizawa shut down their excitement with a cold dose of reality. Get back! What? Kirishima blurted, stunned. You're not ready for this fight. Aizawa's voice was firm. He glanced at Kaminari, knowing the student was headstrong, but he couldn't afford to let them get ahead of themselves. Don't even think about fighting right now. Use your quirks to contact the outside world. That's your priority. Hey? Momo asked, confused. Shouldn't the school's alarm system have gone off by now? Wouldn't they already know about the intruders? 13 looked up at the ceiling, visibly troubled. The alarms, they should have been triggered by now. Something's interfering, Todoroki deduced, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the villains below. They must have someone whose quirk is jamming the sensors. Kaminari's face darkened. It's more than that, he muttered grimly. I've been trying to send out a signal with my communicator since the attack started, but it's being blocked. There's another wave covering the area, jamming all radio signals. That means someone among the villains is using an electricity-based quirk to block communications, Kaminari continued. And they're good at it, better than me, for sure. He clenched his fists, frustration simmering beneath the surface. If it's just another electricity user, I can deal with them. But if they're leagues above me in every way, we're in serious trouble. Aizawa frowned, his usual calm now strained. He processed Kaminari's assessment quickly. So, we're on our own for now, he thought, knowing they couldn't rely on backup. He turned to 13. Get the students to safety. Then, find a way to contact the school. Understood, but what about you? Midoriya asked, concern evident in his voice. You can't take on that many villains alone. Your quirk only works when you can erase theirs, but in a fight like this. Kaminari chimed in, yeah, sensei, you should let us help handle the smaller fry. You can't take on all of them at once by yourself. Aizawa paused for a moment, as if considering their words. But then, he gave a sharp reply, remember, having one strong quirk doesn't make you a hero. Without another word, Aizawa removed the bandages from his neck, his sharp eyes narrowing as he sprinted toward the growing horde of villains. His parting words echoed back to the students. This is the domain of heroes. I'll leave the rest to you, 13. Kaminari's lips curled into a smirk. Aizawa hadn't explicitly allowed them to fight, but his message was clear, UA students had the right to use their quirks freely on campus. And now, they were facing villains. This was no longer a classroom lesson. This was real. Good, Kaminari murmured. Let's do this. In the distance, Aizawa dove into the mob of villains with remarkable precision, neutralizing their quirks one by one. His movements were fluid, calculated, a perfect example of a pro-hero in action. The enemies fell before they even realized what was happening. Whoa! Kaminari whispered in awe, watching their teacher dismantle the group. So this is the strength of a pro-hero. The others weren't far behind in their excitement. All right. Bakugo growled, sparks flying from his hands. It's time to crush these bastards. Kirishima and Tetsu were practically buzzing with energy, eager to dive into the action. They didn't notice, however, that some of their classmates like Mineta were pale with fear, frozen at the thought of facing real villains. Kaminari, sensing the tension, approached the more nervous students with a calm smile. Don't worry. I'm here with you. Thanks, Kaminari. Kyoka and Momo, though still on edge, visibly relaxed at his words. Having someone exude confidence in a crisis did wonders to ease their nerves. Just as Bakugo and the others prepared to charge into battle, the ground beneath them darkened, and a swirling vortex of purple-black energy suddenly erupted, enveloping everyone in its path. What the hell is this? Tetsu shouted, scanning the ominous energy field. Nice to meet you. The voice was polite, almost disturbingly so. A human-like figure made of purple-black energy appeared before them, introducing himself in an unnervingly calm tone. We are the League of Villains. The figure continued as if this were a casual conversation. We apologize for our abrupt visit to UA. Hi. Our mission is simple, we're here to kill the symbol of peace, All Might. While the villain monologued, Kaminari's mind was racing. He was scanning the vortex for any weaknesses. Every quirk, no matter how powerful, had its limits or flaws. The trick was finding them. If only I could test this guy with a good jolt of electricity. Kaminari thought, frustrated. But there were too many of his classmates around. He couldn't risk hurting them in the process. Where does this guy get off talking so much? Bakugo's patience finally snapped. Without warning, he launched himself at the villain, his hand igniting in a violent explosion aimed directly at the figure's head. Boom! Kirishima and Tetsu followed suit, charging in right behind Bakugo. A hardened hand chop from Kirishima and a steel kick from Tetsu slammed into the villain's form, sending ripples through the purple-black energy. Got him? Kaminari asked, shielding his face from the smoke and debris. But from within the smoke, the villain's voice echoed again, calm, almost amused. So dangerous, so dangerous. The villain laughed. You students have incredible potential. The figure remained intact. Kaminari's stomach dropped as he realized the attacks had done nothing. He's immune to physical damage. Kaminari thought, his fingers tightening around the coin he was holding. Is this guy some kind of energy being? His mind flashed back to the Logia-type devil fruit users from the anime One Piece. If this villain was anything like that, it would make things much more complicated. Before Kaminari could process it fully, the villain moved again. The dark energy around him began to expand, growing more volatile. The sheer volume of energy created a wave-like force, far too much for 13 to absorb all at once. My mission is to scatter you and kill you one by one. The villain declared, his energy surging forward. Everyone, watch out! 13 shouted, but it was too late. The wave of energy was too powerful to stop, and in the blink of an eye, Kaminari and his classmates were swallowed by the vortex. Gotcha! Kaminari acted on instinct, grabbing hold of Kyoka and Momo's hands. He pulled them close as the world around them twisted and warped. Then, as quickly as the energy had enveloped them, the vortex dissipated. Sunlight streamed back into the space, but something was horribly wrong. Ida and 13 looked around in horror. Everyone, they're gone.
Thanks for listening.